Hello and welcome, my gentle and of course very modern apes. My name is Erika, and welcome to SkepTalk. Today is of course the 29th of July, 2024, and I'm pleased to be back. I'm pleased to be back here on SkepTalk. I'm pleased to be back here in the States. For those of you who haven't seen me in a while, I've been in Kenya for the past month. Looking for fossils and working at the museum, which is something that my wonderful audience helped fund, and they helped fund something else that we're going to talk about here in a moment. It was wonderfully successful, but I'm glad to be back. I'm here with Grayson. Grayson, how you doing?
Oh, we are both extremely glad to be back, Erika. Both back on the line on SkepTalk and back from Fieldwork because, cryptically mentioned there, you did help to fund a recent expedition that I was lucky enough to be a part of, also going out there and looking for some cool fossils. So we definitely have to hear more about your expedition to Kenya and how your trip went as well. And I've got a little bit of updates for the expedition that you and your subscribers helped to put together and fund. We've got some huge updates, and I'm so happy to be back here on SkepTalk. The last time I was on here with you, we had some really fun callers. I chose my words very carefully there. I would say those callers were very fun, and I'm hoping that we can have a lot of fun callers today too. And maybe if we're lucky, maybe one of the callers will be able to bring up something that we don't even know about, and we can learn something new, and they can stump us. Wouldn't that be cool?
More than anything, I love coming on SkepTalk and hearing new models, new ideas coming out of creationism and flat Earth to a lesser extent. I love hearing what they have to say. I love working through it with my co-host Grayson. I certainly hope that we're going to get lucky today. And if you're out there and you happen to be, a believer in various types of pseudoscience, and if that term makes you upset, all the more reason. Please call in. You can call in to SkepTalk and you can just hop on the line. We'll have you on the show and we will hash it out, mano here in front of a live studio audience, as it were. And it'll be a blast. So please consider calling in. And for those of you out there who have like a question, maybe related to evolution or something of that nature, you can just super chat in if you don't feel like calling in, right? Well, let's say you got like one question or the other. You want it answered, but you don't want to sit and wait literally on the line all night. Super chats of $5 or more have to be read at the end. It's not optional. We are like contractually, cosmically obligated to read them. So you can call in and we'll go through them and it'll be great. So the lines are open. Call on in, creationists, Bigfoot believers, flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, climate change deniers. I want all of you sitting in there. And the thing is, I've been champing at the bit for weeks, like abroad, unable to argue by in any means other than Twitter. So I've been terminally online on Twitter, getting in fights with people. And it's so weird that we come on SkepTalk and all those people who are really excited to like run their mouths on Twitter, they never show up on these call-in shows. It's so weird. It's almost like they don't actually want to have the conversation.
Yeah, Erika, I got to echo that as saying, as somebody that does debates against what I would label as pseudoscientists, like young Earth creationists, flat earthers, et cetera, I have seen this a lot, where your comments will be flooded by people that be like, you are just lying, you don't know anything, you're not, they'll just drag you through the mud, and then you'll be like, oh, perfect, well, if you can educate me, if you think you have the evidence that refutes my position, what I've been saying, please come on and let's talk about it. And then all of a sudden, you either get radio silence, or they say, I've already made my point, I don't need to come on a debate, and they'll just, just fade in like that Homer Simpson meme going back into the bushes. They'll just disappear on you.
Well, it's the weirdest thing too, because it's, as you said, Grayson, they're all talk until they have the platform, right? Until the opportunity comes to come and actually make their argument. And I don't know. I hate to make a keyboard warrior accusation, but I feel like as a keyboard warrior myself, I know one when I see one. So, I hope we'll get some calls. We've had some wonderful ones last time, but in the meantime, I'm like super psyched to be here with you.
I have a feeling, Erika, that the SkepTalk audience and the reach that they have, and especially after the last time we were on here and the calls we got, I have a feeling that the audience will try to prove us wrong tonight. and that maybe we will get some people that actually can come forward and actually try to get us to change our minds on these things. So again, my channel is largely about debating pseudoscience, but I also will, talk about reasons to believe in God, theism versus atheism, the origins of the universe, physics. I've taken graduate courses in cosmology. If you have questions about the Big Bang, you've got questions about the origin of life. I've got a degree in biochemistry. It's one of my big wheelhouses. I'm close to getting a debate with James Tour, but he says that my YouTube channel is not big enough, and he doesn't want to increase my subscriber account. So he says that he doesn't want to debate me until my YouTube channel is bigger. So we'll see. I'm trying to get that arranged with James Tour, but I love talking about origin of life, origin of the universe, evolution, the whole gambit of science versus pseudoscience and religion. Bring in your calls. Try to convince us that we are wrong.
Well, now that's really interesting that you had a potential opportunity, or you have a looming possibility to chat with James Tour, because the thing that I've always found so interesting about Tour is that, he loves to have this conversation about origin of life, but he's also like a young earth creationist. And I find it very fascinating that that's the part that he refuses to ever actually step out and defend, right? Like, the abiogenesis situation is like his little fortress that he likes to argue from, that he won't deviate like outside of. It's very odd.
I'll clarify one thing, Erika, just so that nobody can accuse us of straw manning James Tour. I know that people were already preparing those comments to lob at us. James Tour, he has never come out and explicitly said that he is a young earth creationism, that he's a young earth creationist. He says, you know what? I think it's ambiguous. It could be old. It could be young. He's agnostic about it. So that's as much as he's willing to commit to any kind of scientific position that is in line with his religious beliefs. He likes to keep them separate, and he doesn't want to talk about his religion and his science and his religion, even though we all know in reality that these things are not just a Venn diagram for him, but like a significant one.
I think it's also because he knows that he can't defend it as well, right? Like, I've heard him used before in like clips that on other people's channels and shows and things like that, where he'll mention something along the lines of like, oh, I haven't looked into this, or I haven't looked into that. Brother, what? You spend like a portion of your career arguing against abiogenesis because you basically want to quash like naturalism, essentially, if we were to draw conclusions from his church appearances, right? But then you've genuinely never like looked into the age of the earth or evolutionary theory or anything of that nature as a synthetic chemist. Really? That's so strange to me. I have trouble. That's a tough pill for me to swallow.
It's one of the many trips that I've done for part of my YouTube channel journey. Is like, again, I think the last time I was on here, we brought up that I went to Kent Hovind's Dinosaur Adventureland. We just mentioned how I just got back from, potentially going on a dinosaur fossil hunting expedition, finding some dinosaur fossils, and sort of sticking it to the young earth creationists once again, because guess what? I've been out there. I've seen it, guys. These things are not sorted by anything that a flood could sort these fossils according to. Like, they're not sorted by density, mobility, intelligence, habitat. They're sorted by species over geologic time in a way that's explained by evolution. And none of the creationists have any explanation for the ordering of the fossil record, which both of us just witnessed firsthand. If you've got anybody that wants to try to argue with us about the order of the fossil record and Noah's flood, we've got some firsthand experience looking at those fossils in that order, and the flood isn't explaining that. But my point was, I've done lots of trips, and one of those was I went to that Dave Farina and James Tour debate in person, and that's where I spoke with James Tour. And I brought up the fact that he had posed a specific challenge for abiogenesis, naturalistic abiogenesis, that he says was impossible. I brought up the fact that it's not impossible. I showed him the paper that is explicitly what he asked for, and it was with amyloids. And I asked him if he'd ever heard the amyloid world hypothesis, which is my personal favorite hypothesis of abiogenesis. Not saying it's right. It's my favorite. I like him. And he said that he'd never even heard of it. He'd never heard of it. I was like, this is your wheelhouse. You pass yourself off as an expert on abiogenesis for your YouTube audience, and you've never even heard of like one of the competing hypotheses for this area of science. Like, it's beyond what even you were just saying.
I mean, I think therein lies the problem, right? Like, that's what makes it clear that this isn't his wheelhouse, right? I mean, when we go out on expeditions, right? So the group that was with me this year in West Kenya, we look at the early Miocene. It's like we have a guy out there who's a geologist. We have a guy out there who's a herpetologist. We have people out there who do faunal communities, who do taphonomy. We have people out there who are primate specialists, people out there who are ruminant specialists, right? Like there's so many subspecialties that exist that you don't get to pick a category as broad as synthetic chemist and then claim that you also have expertise in origin of life. No one would do that. I mean, and the attitude is, Grayson, you and I have talked about this before, but the attitude is just so different. I mean, you really know who you're talking to when you've got somebody who's so willing to step outside of the area that they're degreed in, of the area that they publish in, who's so willing to step out of Dodge there, versus somebody who, they have their little specialty and they refuse to even step a toe out because there's somebody who's more well-versed, and that should be the person that they'll tell you, right, that should be the person that you go touch base with rather than them. It's a mark of somebody, I think, who's got a little bit of humility, but I do truly hope that you end up having your James Tour debate. That would just be delightful.
Yes. So I've been able to talk to some, just in the last time that I've been on SkepTalk, I've been able to talk to some decently high profile Christian apologists. Like I talked with Frank Turek, I spoke with Cy Gart, and we're going to be having a more in-depth debate about, the biochemistry of evolution and abiogenesis. So I've been able to talk with some big names, but so far James Tour has said that he's afraid that if he has a debate with me, then my channel will get too popular, and he doesn't want a hand in that because, and this is literally the reasoning he used for me, he takes personal credit for the popularity of Professor Dave's channel. Like he said, Professor Dave was not nearly as popular until he had his debate with Professor Tour. And Dr. Tour literally thinks that he is the reason why Professor Dave's channel gains millions of subscribers, even though it's really the reverse. And Tour is only famous for his videos with Professor Dave.
I mean, he knows that you can look this up on Social Blade, right? Like this is something that anybody out there can just Google and look at, like, okay, what's the growth of this, social media person? When were there big spikes? When were there big dips? Whatever. Like this is something that anyone can look up. That's so boomer brained. God.
Well, he knows that his audience is not going to look up the things he says. His audience expects him to have an expert opinion. They say, wow, Dr. Tour is one of the most genius origin of life researchers today. He's got over 700 publications, even though it's an entirely different field. And that's what his audience is primed to think, is anything that this guy says, that's the expert scientific opinion. So they're not going to fact check it. And the people in his audience are not the most scientifically literate people. Let's just say it that way. When I went to that debate with him and Professor Dave, it was in Houston at Dr. Tour's university. So I was expecting it to be a lot of like university crowd, but everybody around me was a Professor Tour fan. Everybody was like, "Oh, I'm so excited to see Professor Dave or Dr. Tour whoop Professor Dave," and they didn't even know who Professor Dave was. They were like, "I heard he's some internet atheist." And then I was like asking, like, how did you hear about this event? Like, these people like are not online. Like, they know almost nothing about abiogenesis. They never even heard the phrase. And then I was like, how did you hear about this? And like, oh, we go to Dr. Tour's church. He invited the whole church to come to this debate. And they literally knew nothing about any biochemistry. They didn't even know like what a protein was. Like, that is the audience for these people.
I mean, this is the same kind of strategy that like stocks the seats, right? For when, these what do you call it, a Fathom event, right? Like at AMC, like they'll show these brief runs of like, is Genesis history or something like that. It's these church crowds are committed. They get butts in seats. So I guess you got to give them that. But if I'm going to waste my time going and sitting in on a presentation, I would want, speaking for myself here, to at least be a little bit well-versed in what's going on so I can follow the conversation. But, maybe that's just me. Grayson, are you
Wait, Erika. Oh, sorry.
You go.
I
You
was
go.
literally about to
You go.
ask you, like, before we get to the calls or anything, and before we miss it, I think everybody in the audience, and myself included, like, really wants to hear about your expedition to Kenya and wants to hear more about that. I know you probably are going to make a video on it, so I don't want to steal any of your thunder from that. But, like, I myself am dying to hear more about your trip, and I think the audience is probably too.
Oh, dude, it was phenomenal. I'll be brief because we have
Erika?
callers on the line now. Was that
Erika?
Morgan?
Yeah.
Yes.
We've got a caller that wants to talk about that. Why don't you just take that call and then you can
Perfect.
do that.
Phenomenal idea, Morgan. Sweet. Okay, let me check it out. Oh, wait. Yep. I think you might know this caller, Grayson. Doc, welcome. This is a friend of the channel, friend of SkepTalk, friend of the line. Doc has recently just come back from an expedition of his own, actually the one with Grayson, where they were they found some new dinosaurs, which is awesome. Doc, can you hear us? Hello, Doc.
I
Doc,
can
we can't
verify
hear
that
you, dude.
he's a real person.
Doc, we can't hear you, dude. Well, in the meantime, I'm gonna give you the brief rundown for myself. It was awesome. We found a ton of different things out in West Kenya. The work that I do is out in Koru. It is a very, very rainy part of the country. You get these massive storms that come off because of the confluence of 3 different rift systems. So you just get battered by these daily massive thunderstorms. But what that does mean is that there's a lot of erosion happening, like in between these enormous storms. So we found a lot of really wonderful stuff. We visited some old sites that, if you're interested in the Miocene, you've probably heard of before. Places like Legitet, Koru, 10 specifically. The area called Chemtwara, so it's the CA at the KNM, and Caprite and Songkhor and places like that where you find all sorts of cool Miocene stuff. And, I don't want to bore anybody too much, but I will tell you that I found the Miocene ape canine, which is amazing because that's what I study, is Miocene ape canine. So, I found more teeth last year, but this year I found like a really nice little canine that I'm quite proud of that's now sitting in the museum. So, amongst many other rodent incisors and proximal femora and, tragulid teeth and stuff like that. So, but the ape canine for me, that's the pièce de résistance. So for me, it was remarkably successful. I got to measure and scan hundreds of Miocene ape canines that are going to go directly towards my dissertation, which, the sooner I finish that, the sooner I'll actually be like Dr. Gibbon instead of just Gutsick Gibbon. So, I'm ABD. I'm getting closer. You there, Doc?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm sorry for being quiet for so long. I had this tab muted because I was editing something, and I thought there was another caller before me. I'm sorry.
No problem. How have you been? How are you? Tell us about your expedition. How'd it go?
Well, honestly, it went pretty dang well. I'm not sure how much Grayson has said already, but we found a ton, just a ton of fossils out here in Wyoming. Unfortunately, we have not found the fossil we were looking for, or at least one of them, but we found plenty of sites that have been reported to the U.S. Bureau of Land Management, so they can be preserved. So the expedition was still success.
So for those of you who may not know out there, there's probably a pretty heavy overlap between SkepTalk and the line and then, folks who watch my channel as well. But we managed to fundraise enough money in one 12-hour stream to go on 2 separate expeditions, which is so wonderful for science as a whole. I mean, these kinds of grassroots fundraising events are really, really important to do community science and to do, big S science. And I just, I will never stop being grateful for the community that exists here at SkepTalk that, again, is I also consider part of my community too. So just a huge thank you to everybody who contributed to that. And Doc, I'm so glad that things went well.
Yes, and I just want to echo what you just said. Thank you to everyone who helped with Erika and my expedition. It means the world to me, honestly. Like, it's huge. Like, science unfortunately doesn't get as much funding as we would wish. So donations from the general public are massive. Like, they can make or break an expedition. Or two, in this
Well,
case.
and I think it's pretty dang cool that like a cultivated YouTube community here, right, at SkepTalk between our channels and things like that are responsible for like actually getting stuff done. I mean, that's absolutely wonderful. And then, you know, ideally this makes science more accessible to everyone as well. I mean, I try to be transparent with what I do, and I know you guys are as well, which, you know, it just gives us all more to learn and a larger opportunity to do so.
Yes, I'm actually right now working on making a documentary about this whole expedition and the background behind it. And
How wonderful.
I'm happy to say that I'm planning on moving to this area. So even though we didn't find Lentil, the object of our subject of our expedition so far, I might still find her someday while I'm out here.
There you go. That's all you can ask for, you know? I mean, golly, there were so many people who I talked to, you know, at the museum and then out in Kenya as well, where it's like, you know, these people you go on expedition year after year after year, you go do field work and you find nothing. And then one day you just hit the jackpot. And usually somebody's like walked over it every day, you know, for the past 20 years. And then one day someone looks down and they're like, holy shit, there is like a Gomphotherium skull under there. We've just been standing on a Gomphotherium.
Or you just sit on it.
Yeah.
I can speak
Like you
a
sit
little
on it
bit.
on accident.
I can speak a little bit to that part because it has been a real like roller coaster of a journey being like along for the ride for this expedition. For those of you that don't know, like Doc was gracious enough to accept my wild proposition that I asked him if I could come along for this epic trip because literally finding dinosaur fossils has been a childhood dream of mine, as I'm sure it is for like many people out there. I mean, who doesn't want to find a dinosaur fossil? So when this opportunity came up, I heard what Doc was doing. I was like, dude, let me come with you, please. Like buddy system, rattlesnakes, I'll do whatever it needs to do. I'll take whatever hit. And so Doc let me come out there with him. I was thinking I was only going to be out there for like maybe 3 to 5 days because I thought it would be an absolutely like miserable, hellish experience just being out there in the heat all day in, day out. But actually, I found myself like, I really wanted to find this freaking fossil. Like I was like, when I was like on day 5, I'm like, no, I can't leave yet. We haven't found Lentil yet. We got to do this. And so like I found like I was like my curiosity and like willpower for like discovery like kind of overwhelmed the physical pains of my body. And so I was actually
Yeah,
I
he
think we stayed out
eventually
there
got the
maybe,
pale
like,
fever.
yeah, I think eventually we got maybe like 11 or 12 days in the field or something. And it was like in one of our last days in the field where we were going back over an area that we had already been over before, where we like I'm like, how did we miss this? We found like a whole trail that led up to an entire site that led like down an entire rabbit hole of like, I mean, I won't spoil everything that's in the video. I mean, Doc's doing a video on it. I've got a video on it coming out of my channel. I won't spoil everything, but we did manage to find like the area of Wyoming that we were looking at is one of the most like dense areas of dinosaur fossils on the planet. Like it was incredible. Like the amount of dinosaur fossils that we were finding while we were out there was so exciting. It was like almost every day we were coming out there and finding something new. And a few
Yeah.
of those were actually like really, really cool specimens that we reported to the Bureau of Land Management, and an actual like paleontologists will come out there, assess it, and see if these sites are worthy of being excavated completely, which is very, very exciting, knowing you could have contributed to potentially an entire specimen like that being found and excavated. So we had a lot of high moments. And on the very last day of the expedition, we thought that we found Lentil. And so we were riding that high. We thought, like, I was at least 90% sure that we had found it. Qualitatively, the specimen at the site that we had stumbled upon, which had been already taken out of the ground 20 years ago, matched exactly with what we were looking for. It was a small sauropod, which is already pretty rare. The lithology seemed to qualitatively match. Even there were micro fault lines in the two specimens that seemed like everything matched. I was like, there's no way that all that could just be a coincidence and these could be two different specimens. And then 3 weeks later, We finally get the trace element analysis results back from the lab today, just a couple hours before this call, and they're negative. Apparently, these samples are not a match. And my mind was blown. I already literally had the whole video scripted out and everything, explaining that they were a match, and I was just waiting for the results to insert them in and say, like, yep, here you go, we found it, we found lentil, guys, like, celebration. And then literally just a couple hours ago, the results came back from the lab. Nope. And that's just how science is. I mean, you can't force your results. I mean, I really thought it was a sure thing. So we've been on a little bit of a roller coaster, but it was still a greatly successful expedition overall. We still found a lot of amazing sites, and lentil might still be out there, and we're going to continue to look for her.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And, I mean,
That's what
I'm
it's all
still
about.
doing field work when I can. It was a shot to the heart that we didn't find her, but hey, we're not done. Or at least I'm
You
not
keep
done.
looking. That's what it's about. You gotta get back at it. I'm so happy to hear that it was successful, though, you guys. That's wonderful.
Yeah, we found sauropods. We might. I actually went into the basin, or the area we were looking at a few days ago, to double check some of the sites. We might have part of an allosaur poking out of a hillside. We might have several sauropods, just based on like the size of some bones that are coming out. It's nuts, honestly. Like,
Doc, all of the creation,
again, just kudos.
Want to clarify? Did we find any non-Mesozoic specimens out there? Any mammals, like any specimens that shouldn't belong together with dinosaurs?
We have not. Well, we could find mammals out there, but I think you mean non-Mesozoic mammals, and no.
That's what I clarified. Yeah. So all the animals that we found out there were Mesozoic fossil animals. We didn't find any rabbits, any polar bears. We didn't find anything that would make us go, wait a minute, maybe a giant global flood put this here. Maybe this didn't evolve in Mesozoic. Maybe this is all just from a global flood. Nothing of our findings out in the field indicated that at all, did it, Doc?
Nope. And I can, not certified yet, but as a degree-holding geologist, I can happily say, none of the rocks gave any indication of any global flood. Like, there were some deposits that might have been local floods, but you can measure how big they were, and they weren't very big. Probably just would have flooded like a valley. Lots of river deposits, a lot of soils, like well-developed soils with cycads poking out of the rock. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's crazy how that works, right? Like you have an expectation for various different models, and then you go out there and you see if it matches them, and then you come away with like a provisional conclusion. And it's like, you have this model that here's what a global flood would look like if one had happened. It's just crazy that no site anywhere across the entire world actually meets that. It's so bizarre. It's almost like it didn't happen.
Whoa, Erika, let's not go overboard here. Let's not lose our heads.
I've gotten meaner over the years, boys. As the more that I spend time on Twitter and engage with bad faith actors, the more I'm like, I feel a little bit less, sympathetic. Unfortunately, I have just a little bit. My niceness meter just clicks away.
Erika, that's honestly a good thing. Like, in looking at the comments from the last time that we co-hosted SkepTalk together, like, a lot of the comments were like, these two are way too nice. Like, they should have hung up on that guy that was claiming to be a time traveler, like, after 2 minutes. And we talked to that guy for like 25 minutes.
I forgot about that.
Like, okay, counterpoint to the people in the comments. If we had hung up on him after 2 minutes, okay, and he was a real time traveler, you all would have felt really ridiculous, wouldn't you? Okay? So we had to make sure that he wasn't a real time traveler, right?
We were covering our bases just in case, because we were relying for the possibility. We had our hypothesis, we were running our tests. We did come to the conclusion that he's probably not a time traveler.
I'm leaning no.
Yeah, I'm leaning no as well, I think. Well,
Sounds
Doc,
like y'all had a
thank you
fun time.
thank you so much for calling in and like updating us. I'd love to get a more in-depth update from you one-on-one, but unfortunately we do have other callers. We actually have a theist caller on the line, so I've got to get to that.
Sure.
But thank you so much, and I'm so pleased that your expedition was successful. I wish you the best of luck with it. I'm sure you're in the same phase I am, which is like analyzing everything that you collected,
Yes.
all the data that you collected, and that is a feat. It is quite daunting. So, best of luck.
And
Have some coffee.
Before I go, I do just want to say again, thank you very much for helping fundraise for this. Grayson, thank you for helping fundraise. And like, if anyone wants to hire this man to look for fossils, he's a freaking natural at it. Like, he found easily at least half of the specimens out there. It's nuts. I don't believe this is your first time hunting for dinosaurs. But
Grayson,
at any rate, yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks for all the help, and hope y'all have a good afternoon. I'll be listening.
Of course. Thanks, Doc. Take care.
Adios.
So, Grayson, I'm so tickled to hear that. I'm so tickled to hear that you're phenomenal at finding fossils, because it's actually very difficult, and a lot of people don't know how difficult finding fossils can be, right? Like, you get out there and you're expecting that this is going to be quite easy. How can a bone hide, right? But it turns out that they blend in quite well to the surrounding sediment, and some of the places that we work at least, we're looking at microfossils. So you're looking at micro-mammal vertebrae that are like significantly smaller than my fingernail, and it's like you got to get up close and personal with the ground, baby. And let me tell you, I'm convinced that the best fossil finders in the entire world, they're all from Kenya. The local Kenyan fossil finders kicked our asses. They're so incredible at fossil finding. I will never stop singing their praises. Here I am on my hands and knees. I crawl over a spot. I've looked at this thing. I have gone over it 4 or 5 times with my eyes. I'm like, there's nothing here. I move past it. And then the guy behind me will come through and he'll find like 8 things. And like one of them will be like an ape tooth. And he'll be like, oh, how'd you miss this Rangwapithecus incisor? And I'll be like, well, I guess I'll just walk into the river now. They're nuts good at it.
Yeah.
So pat yourself on the back.
We didn't have any crackpot Kenyans or local Wyomingians. I don't know, but we didn't have anybody with us besides Doc and I looking for them. But luckily, I was a complete nerd in elementary school, and I didn't play any sports. And I spent every day at recess with my friend Noah in the playground looking at the rocks for fossils. Every day. So that's where all of my skills were developed in elementary school recess. And we didn't find, like, we would sometimes find little shells. And then, like, one day I thought I found a jellyfish, and it was, like, clearly not, in retrospect, not a jellyfish at all. But I was convinced it was. It was 3rd grade. And Noah was like, that's not a jellyfish. And I said, yes, it is. And he took it and threw it. And I was so upset that the next time Noah found a fossil, and it was a crinoid. And guys, in retrospect, as an adult, I can say this, that actually was a legit crinoid, and it was the best fossil that we ever found at our elementary school recess. And when he showed that to me, I took it and threw it. I'm not even kidding. I was so mad about the jellyfish thing. Oh.
Grayson, I feel like that kind of retribution though is almost unstoppable. Like, if I don't know if I would have been able to tamp it down either.
It was 3rd grade, guys. Cut me some slack. My emotional center had not developed yet.
So we have a call on the line that I want to get to. So we have some wonderful atheist callers here that I'm hoping we'll get to. But as everybody knows, here on SkepTalk, we do have priority for theist callers, and we have a theist caller here on the line. And then we also have an interesting call that I would like to get to that's not necessarily theistic, but I do want to touch base on it. I think it will be an interesting chat to have. But first and foremost, we have Jay, pronouns he, him. He is from Nevada. He's a pantheist. And his question that he has for us is, at what point in the evolutionary chain did we develop consciousness? So can you hear us, Jay?
Yeah, what's going on?
What's going on, dude? How are you?
I'm all right. How are you guys? It's a treat. Erika and Grayson, pretty good. Pretty sick.
Tell us a little bit about
I watch
your
all the
question.
time, but sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, I was listening a few weeks ago on the way to work, and you were discussing. I don't remember who was the other host, but it was actually about how we became in the evolutional scale, separating ourselves from like not just apes, but like orangutans, things of that nature. And I was actually curious at what point does the consciousness develop for our species specific to our ape ancestral heritage? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, I've said this many times here on SkepTalk, and this is something that I maintain, and I think I can provide quite a bit of support for. I don't think consciousness is something that it's like it is or it isn't, and it is in humans and isn't in everything else. I think consciousness is a gradient. You have lots of different animals, from mammals to birds to reptiles to fish to arguably even more quote unquote simplistic organisms that are capable of various levels of consciousness. And when I say consciousness, I mean they're aware of their surroundings and they actively choose to do things, some of which are seemingly outside of just basic survival. And so what I would propose is that the level of consciousness that humans have is a continuation on an existing gradient when we look at the rest of the animal kingdom, right? So I would propose that other apes are conscious. I would propose that other catarrhine monkeys are conscious, and proboscideans are conscious, like elephants and the like, and cetaceans and corvids, and all sorts of different things. And then if you take it down the line, I would say that you have some organisms, like I would say like a mouse is conscious, but the level of consciousness that it inhabits is not as complex, I would say, as the type that humans and other sort of quote unquote higher order social animals sort of inhabit, right? And so the line goes as we move from more complicated social systems and more complicated animals to more simple animals with less complicated social systems. So in that light, I would propose that consciousness as we see it in humans emerges quite early indeed. And that consciousness as a whole is an elaboration on a pretty basic concept of self-awareness.
So I maybe have a little bit of a different take here than Erika does, but my thinking on this has sort of been evolving, pun intended, but it's been in flux. Ever since a couple months ago, maybe 6 months ago or so, I watched a lecture by Peter Godfrey Smith. Have either of you ever heard of him? He's I believe he's a biologist. He might be a philosopher, or like a philosopher of science, but I know that he was involved as a grad student in the discovery of blind sight. I'm not sure, Jay, if you're familiar with blind sight, but I think it's actually really important for this conversation because that kind of led his career down some interesting paths. So blind sight is where it's like a condition where there's nothing wrong with your visual cortex in your brain. There's nothing wrong with your eyes. There's nothing wrong with any of your visual system. But you have no experience of sight. You do not think you can see. Your experience of the world is subjectively the same as a blind person, but you can see. Your eyes are working. Your visual cortex is working. You are just not consciously aware of it. And so they did a lot of really interesting experiments, and Peter Godfrey Smith was involved when they discovered this in monkeys. But then they've since elucidated it in humans as well, where you can talk to these people, they're convinced they're blind. And then you show them something on a screen and they can know information about it, but they don't know how they know that information. They're not getting that through their visual systems. They don't think that they're seeing anything, even though their body is seeing. They're not consciously aware of it. And so Peter Godfrey Smith made the case that this sort of processing of information, visual information in this case, but without a lack of conscious awareness, is sort of the more basal state of intelligence, where you have intelligence, you have competence, but essentially you have not just blind sight, but you have blind everything. You have no conscious awareness of any of the procedures. Like you basically don't have a subjective awareness of anything. You don't have consciousness, but you do have a brain, you do have intelligence, you do have competency. You just don't have a subjective experience of these things. And so Peter Godfrey Smith proposed a pretty interesting way to determine if animals are conscious or not. Because I agree with Erika, humans are definitely not the only conscious animals. I would say that pretty much all mammals are conscious. I think Peter Godfrey Smith would agree with that. But here's where it gets weird, and where Peter Godfrey Smith says something that I had never thought of, and I'm not convinced of. But he says that warm-blooded animals are conscious and cold-blooded animals are not. And he says that the reason for this is because, like, depending on your body temperature, the neurons can communicate like electrically at different speeds. So when it's hotter, when you're warm-blooded, you can actually get more efficient electrical communication within the neural system. And so cold-blooded, maybe they don't have the necessary energy to maintain the kind of energy requirement that consciousness requires in brain activity all the time. That was his one quick thing. I know I've been going on for a while, but his gauge about whether or not determine an animal was conscious or not was whether or not it can be observed to participate in activities that are purely for the pursuit of a subjective experience. So he showed videos of like monkeys surfing and birds like enjoying going down a water slide, or like animals doing something for fun, playing with their kids, doing something that seems like there's no like, well, there's a practical purpose of playing with your kids, but there's no purpose beyond just the pursuit of an experience, or there's some sort of establishment that they understand that others, like their kids, are having experiences as well. So he was looking at these gauges, and based on this, he says that only warm-blooded animals have been documented to have activities that are in the pursuit of subjective experience, which I don't know if I buy. That was just his take, because my immediate thing I thought of was octopus. Because octopus, I think you'd have a really tough argument saying that octopus are not conscious. But that's what Peter Godfrey Smith is arguing. I really would love to talk to like an invertebrate expert or some octopus expert in octopus behavior and get to the bottom of this and see if octopus are doing things for fun or not. Because I know octopus, I can't even imagine what their conscious experience is like, because each of their arms is operated independently by its own little mini brain. So it's like, how do you even operate if you're not controlling your limbs? I don't know. I don't know what that conscious experience is like, but I've talked for way too long. That's my thoughts about it. It's in flux. I'm not sure, but it could be when we developed warm-bloodedness in the evolutionary timeline, that could correspond to a development of consciousness as well. And I think it might be a little bit more of an on-off switch than Erika is pointing to. And I can talk about what I think consciousness is, but that would be, I've been talking too much.
Jay,
No, you're
what
good.
do you think of all that so far?
Well, I was actually, while he was talking, he did kind of go on for a little bit there, you know what I'm saying? I was actually looking up the paper that he was talking about, and I found a great one that was Jay Birch's cited by a couple, an abstract with Peter Godfrey Smith, Metazoa, and Joseph Ledoux. Really interesting so far. And I think that that's actually a really good point. It's called The Hatching of Consciousness, which is intriguing to me.
So
I do appreciate you for giving that reference.
Yeah, I mean, so that was my immediate thought as well, is I think that you have invertebrates, mostly mollusks, that are capable of I would argue, higher order function. I mean, we've seen octopi, octopodes, octopuses, whichever plural you want to use, solve pretty complex puzzles. As for each of their brains, like potentially, occupying a tentacle or something, I've heard that as well, and I don't know the details of it, but I imagine it would probably be similar to like humans with split brain disorder, right? Where they sever the corpus callosum, and then sometimes you end up with split brain, where like each of the halves of your brain is effectively operating on its own, and neither half is aware that it's sort of been severed, if you will. So I would imagine it would probably be something similar to that. You would have a sort of group that's cooperating with one another. I mean, the brain's plasticity in humans alone is pretty difficult to understand, but I don't think impossible. I would argue that I would take your sort of pitch on that, though, Grayson. I think that arguing that the mollusks are not capable of higher order consciousness, however you want to define consciousness or higher order, I think that's a tough sell for me. And I also think that there are probably some non-avian dinosaurs that were capable, that were perhaps very early on in their evolutionary history, that would be considered cold-blooded, perhaps. Sauropsids, like moving back into the Permian, that probably would have been pretty, intelligent as well. So I don't know I'm just going to leave it at that's a hard sell for me, because I see the evolution of cognition in so many different branches along the animal kingdom. I have to believe that it's convergent. I have to believe that it's homoplasy, that in social organisms, there is a pressure, specifically in social organisms, there is a pressure to not just be aware of your surroundings, but be aware of the others who inhabit those surroundings. And you get this pressure for a proto-theory of mind, and then a theory of mind as a whole. So the theory of mind, Jay, is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, which, as you can imagine, is super useful if you live in a group with others, because if you can predict what somebody else is going to do, that makes it a lot easier for you to compete with them, or convince them to have kids with you, or defeat them in your hierarchical ranking and things of that nature. And I think that's why we typically see it in social critters. But octopi can be social as well. Sometimes they're solitary, sometimes they're social. So I don't think we can even isolate it there.
Stop you real quick?
Yeah,
I
go
don't want to
ahead.
interrupt you there. But
No, go
I
ahead.
really stopped in there because of the social aspect. Because there was a discussion with you and I don't remember the name of her, but you were partnered there and you discussed the social aspects, exclusivity to certain species. And actually, I had a question about that with mammals. Are mammals exclusive to religion, like conscious mammals, or is that like an exclusive aspect, like to us?
That is a really good question. I don't know, and I don't know how we would know, right? Like if there was an octopus religion, or corvids had some kind of religious thought, I think corvids meaning like crows, right? I would assume that the way that you would figure that out is by looking for symbolism, right, in their societies, and I'm not aware of that, like that having been uncovered anywhere. I'm not sure if it's because mammals are the only ones who have continued down that trajectory to this termination, to this terminal point, or if it's because we just aren't looking for the right thing. So, as an anecdote, for a really long time, we thought that mammals didn't have, or sorry, not mammals. We thought that corvids didn't have a neocortex, right? We were like, oh, this is exclusive to mammals, the new brain, it's the mammalian brain. And corvids don't have a neocortex proper, but they have a convergently evolved structure that functions almost identically to a neocortex, what we see in mammals, the higher order brain in mammals. They just have a bird version of it, right? So just because we have something in ourselves that looks one way, right, how we experience and exhibit religion, that doesn't necessarily mean, ethologically speaking, that other critters don't have that proclivity, because we might not know what we're even looking for. Like Franz de Waal famously said, are we smart enough to know how smart animals are? It's a good question. It's worded in a silly way, but I think that's intentional. So I don't know is the long answer to your short question.
I would basically argue that, not even all humans have religion. So it's not like this is some sort of inevitable end state or anything. But like for the majority of human history, we didn't have religion, right? We might have had spirituality, animism, but that's not an actual religion. So yeah, I don't even think it's something. It definitely, in my opinion, it's unique to humans, because I don't see any other animals that have a religious elite caste system. That seems to be a hallmark feature of most religions, is that there's a certain caste of society that is elite. They have some sort of gatekeeping over spiritual or religious power, and that makes them elite in society. And we see that in their social structures. We don't really see animals have religious elite that are gatekeeping, like, symbolic information or rituals or whatever. But I do, Erika, if I could, just a brief response to what you were saying, because I agree that cognition is convergently evolved in things like mollusks and stuff. The question is whether or not consciousness is. So I just wanted to draw the distinction between cognition and consciousness, where you can have like an organism that would be 10 times more intelligent than humans, and that doesn't necessitate that they're conscious. I think consciousness is an altogether different activity than just intelligence or cognition. There are two primary core functions of intelligence: relevance seeking. So you can tell what information in the total amount of information that you're being exposed to is relevant to you. That's one core function of intelligence. And then the other one is predictive ability. Like, can you predict what's going to happen next based on the data you have in front of you? And consciousness seems to be a sort of like self-referential a self-referential version of that, where you're basically doing that same two core intelligence, but you're doing it on the actual processes of that core functioning. So you're seeing, what is the relevance of my intellect, my reasoning right now? What is the relevant information in my consciousness? There's a level of self-awareness and like stepping back to where you're getting this sort of self-referential version over intelligence. So it's a different activity than mere cognition or intelligence when you're asking something conscious.
So I'm with you, but I think for me, it's more like I can recognize that they're separate things, but I don't think they've ever evolved out of tandem. Like, I don't think there's a single organism that we would consider to be cognitively inclined or highly intelligent that I don't think exhibits consciousness. And similarly, I don't think there's a single organism that is conscious that is like that whose intelligence or cognition is out of step with that, right? Like, whether we're talking about flatworms or mice or dogs or octopi or squid or whatever, I think those two things are in lockstep. And the reason is because I think it's very hard to select for one without selecting for the other. Like, you can't decouple them easily.
Okay, so I do think that they are related, and there's a really good reason for that, and you're pointing it out. But I do think that there's specifically advantages for consciousness in addition to intelligence. That there's specific like advantages for like energy consumption for consciousness. So where like if you just had a non-conscious intelligent organism evolve, they might have to have pre-programmed responses for every kind of stimulus that they might come across in their day-to-day. They wouldn't be able to respond to novel and dynamic and really complex stimuli that they don't have a pre-programmed response to. Like, they might be able to have really intelligent and really capable responses to everything else that's been, like instinctual. They don't have a conscious awareness about it. But when you have an actual conscious entity, all of a sudden you have a sense of self. You have a subjective experience of an I, and that allows you to have self-preservation that doesn't need to be pre-programmed for every situation. Suddenly, you have this sense of a self and a sense of self-preservation, and now you can adapt and make actually evolutionarily advantageous decisions that preserve yourself in a myriad of different situations that can be novel, they can be complex, whatever can be thrown at you. Your problem solving is going to be a lot more fluid if you're conscious versus if you're just intelligent.
Sure, so and I agree. I'm just saying I don't think that's ever happened, right? Like, I don't think there's ever been, like, can you think of an example of an intelligent organism that isn't conscious, that you would argue isn't conscious?
Yeah, like insects or fish or things like that. So
you call them intelligent?
The overall argument is that intelligence evolves first, and then consciousness evolves like after that. Once the core functions of intelligence are then turned against themselves, and that is a specific process in the brain where you have to have efference copies being made of like actual internal processes in the brain. Like, there's this very specific pattern of brain activity that would have to evolve in order to support consciousness. And it's different than just the brain activity of just intelligence by itself.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I just want you to know, I'm kind of letting you guys talk a lot. I don't want to interrupt because I'm not high enough for like the level of Grayson's in-depthness right now. And I want to rewatch this when I can actually try to understand more than like 80% of what you guys are actually talking about. Holy crap, I didn't understand it was going to get that deep. My bad. But do you guys have like a thesis on the line or something? Yeah.
No, Jay, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I wanted to dig in more to your pantheism, but I think that might be, you got to come down first, and then we'll call back and we'll do a pantheism conversation.
Yeah, my pantheism isn't refined enough yet. I can't refine it enough yet. I don't want to discuss something that I don't have any foundation on. I already kind of gave it one time, but I didn't want to get too deep on it. So it's not refined yet.
No, that is absolutely fair enough. I can respect that. Well, when you sort it out, call and then we'll argue about it.
All right, peace out, guys. All right, I can't wait
Take
to hear
care,
some of
Jay.
these other calls. Peace, guys.
Yeah. Take care, Jay. Bye-bye. Hold on, I'm letting him go. Or I'm trying to, anyways. Okay, drop
Well,
call.
Erika,
Sorry,
I
Jay.
would like,
Okay, sweet.
if you do get a chance to watch or read any of Peter Godfrey Smith, like he does have lectures on YouTube about the evolution of consciousness, where he kind of talks about this, and I'm getting these ideas mainly from Peter Godfrey Smith, and then from John Vervaeke, who was talking about the sort of philosophy of mind and neuroscience for what we've learned about how consciousness differs from intelligence and the core functions of intelligence versus consciousness. This is from like the neuroscience and philosophy of mind literature. So
Yeah,
those are
so
some names.
I think a lot of it, I think a lot of it comes with how you're defining things, right? Because I think based off of this conversation, I use different definitions than the ones that you've put forward here for things like intelligence, cognition, consciousness, where theory of mind meets intersects those two concepts. Because like so even upon hearing this, I would still argue, like from my perspective, with the definitions that I use, that you can't have one without the other, and that these two things typically evolve in lockstep. But that being said, I don't know how you're defining them down to a T, and I don't want to like derail the show to figure it out and then see if I agree or not. But it's an interesting question. I mean, I feel like I'm an example gal. So what I like to do is I like to turn to the animal kingdom and say, okay, like what do we actually see happening there? And like I, for instance, wouldn't classify things like insects and fish, or at least at when I think of an insect or a fish, something like a grasshopper or like a sardine or something like that, like non-intelligent, non high level. See there, I'm sort of baking it in, right? Like I don't consider those critters to be intelligent or cognitive in the same way that I would, a mammal or a bird, and those guys would be slightly higher up. But then again, you also have mollusks that are intelligent, and some people would even argue that some fish are pretty smart. Goldfish can learn tricks, and sharks have to memorize these vast migration patterns. And I think it then boils down to, again, how do you define these things? And De Waal and some of his works, and I think Sapolsky does this as well, who are, my favorite because they're primatologists, that they focus on primates. But, they've pretty famously both pointed out that it's like we assess intelligence by what we think is intelligent. We assess consciousness by how we perceive consciousness. And I think that there is, and they rightly point this out, there's folly in that. That's a fraught way to define it, because it means that we can't investigate very analogous states of being that are separate from that are unique from that. You know what I mean?
So I'll say one more thing. I'll try to just explain this better than maybe I have been. So in terms of how I'm defining intelligence, it'd be the sort of problem solving that's exemplified by those two core functions. And I think that those two core functions are the consensus for what defines the core functions of intelligence in neuroscience and philosophy of mind literature. And then, so that's intelligence. Consciousness, my argument with consciousness is that if something has a subjective sense of self, an experience of an I, things are happening to me, and that's how they experience. They have an awareness that things are happening too. That's how I would define consciousness. And my argument is that it takes a very specific pattern of brain activity to create that sense of self. And that is separate from intelligence. And that it is evolutionarily advantageous to have that sense of self that is created by this specific type of brain activity involving efference copies. But that had to evolve, kind of separately from intelligence. I mean, obviously, the same selective pressures are sort of encouraging both, because you're going to be doing much better problem solving if you're conscious versus if you're not. But
Right.
I would
Yeah.
consider them separate in that regard.
Right, and that I'm on board with. That I'm fine with. But I'm what I'm arguing is that they're not decoupled, right? So like you as you just said, when you select for one, you tend to select for the other, which is why I would push back on the statement that there are intelligent organisms by how we define intelligence. I would push back on the notion that there are intelligent organisms that are not conscious, right? Or they're on some level. Now you've got consciousness there defined as sort of an on-off switch, yeah, like this awareness of self. Well,
Yeah.
I find that hard to assess. I don't think that that's easy to assess in organisms. I think that it is extremely difficult to assess what has a sense of self and what doesn't, because, the case in point, I look at my dogs and I'm like, these guys know that they are existing entities. They're compassionate, empathetic critters. I love them to death, and I will spend all day watching them. I would argue that these guys most certainly have a sense of self. But how do I actually know that? How can I actually show that to be the case? Sometimes my dogs bite their own tails because they get scared by their own farts, right? Like, does that mean that they don't have a sense of self because they can't recognize the back half of them as something that is a part of their whole?
You can't even prove that other humans have a sense of self. You can't even prove other humans are conscious.
Right. And so it's like, minimally, I consider consciousness to be as you sort of defined it, an awareness of oneself that is either consistently or most of the time active, right? I would think most animals have a sense of self. They're aware that they are an entity, and they're aware that that entity can impact their environment. It's not a simple response stimulus. It's a complicated response stimulus. And I would argue that fish have that. Right, like when a shadow passes over a fish gets afraid and they back up into the safety of a rocky outcropping, and then they'll slowly creep out and they'll look, they'll back up a little bit and they'll come back out and they'll double check again.
That doesn't take consciousness, right? Like, that could all be blind sight, right? I mean, like, this is why I liked Peter Godfrey Smith's lecture, because he starts by explaining blind sight and how you can have intelligence and competence but absolutely no awareness. And the blind sight is a perfect example of that. And then I just want to know, but we could wrap this up. I won't push this anymore, but I want to know what you thought about Peter Godfrey Smith's gauge, where he proposes the method to determine what is conscious and what is not. And he said, if the organism can be observed to be pursuing behaviors that are purely the pursuit of a subjective experience, then that's at least one way of determining for sure that one's conscious.
Sure, but then I would say that applies to fish. Fish play games. They interact with their environment in ways that aren't directly tied to their survival. Octopi do this. Lizards do this. I mean, people who have pets of these nature will tell you that. And so then it's like, well, we're back to square one, right? Like, is that not enough? How do we know that that's not response stimulus? We don't, but we don't know that anything isn't response stimulus. You see what I mean? So, like, if it's hard to nail down for these little comparatively quite simple organisms, it just gets harder the more you move up and down the scale. And so I tend to.
I was gonna say, that's why I said that my beliefs in this are in flux, and I haven't 100% I don't want to make it sound like this is my position. Like, Peter Godfrey Smith has not 100% convinced me of anything. He's just made me think about this in a new light in the last few months, and I am also very skeptical about his claims that fish and lizards and cold-blooded animals do not engage in this subjective experience seeking behavior.
I'm out here as a shooter for octopi. I'm out here shooting for octopus. I'm the only one. I'm repping my mollusk, brethren on the tree of life. Like, I'm here. They got shooters in these streets. I'm defending them. I think there's no way that octopi and cuttlefish and some of these guys aren't conscious. But I also I'm the first person out here, as I said in the beginning of this conversation. You have to define these terms, and they're notoriously slippery. They're hard to define, and they're even harder once you define them to test. It becomes an entire mess. Ethology is so much fun, and it's so interesting for exactly this reason. Like, this one time when I took in my master's, right? Like, we had a section that was specifically on theory of mind, a unit on theory of mind. And we had to read this paper that argued that the fact that corvids cache their food, right? So they hide it away when they think no one's looking, and then they come back and eat it when nobody's around, so that no one knows where they stash their good stuff. The paper argued that because you can model this in AI, and this was a paper from quite some time ago, or not AI, you can do a computer model that does similar things, that corvids probably don't have theory of mind, and that this is just a response stimulus. And my response to that was, by that logic, anything that you model can simply be a response stimulus, and then it's only a matter of time until you reach the level where you can mimic something approximating humans, and then humans are just a response stimulus. Now, that might be the case. Who cares? right? It doesn't feel that way. Why can't a response stimulus have a theory of mind? I mean, you have to almost subscribe to a type of dualism to take a step back from that, in my opinion.
I feel like you just put like the Sapolsky bat signal up in the air, and you're just like, no such thing as free will, calling all Sapolsky heads, come in here and tell us that everything.
I'm calling all the Sapolsky heads out there. I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I'm, you know, you say you have like this sort of agnostic position on Smith here, but it's like, that's how I feel about Sapolsky on free will. It's like, I think he makes a pretty good case. Am I sold on it? No, I'm not sold on it, but that's mostly because I haven't like read enough about it yet, because I don't have any time anymore. But it's a fun conversation
Erika,
to have.
As someone who has read Sapolsky's books on these subjects, let me just tell everybody listening, and if you disagree with me, please feel free to call on. There's no such thing as free will. It's all been determined. Come at me.
Okay. Well, Grayson, we're mostly on the same page on this. So call in, and Grayson and I, of no free will of our own, will argue you down. So, okay,
and
how about this?
It's especially true if you donate $5 to try to argue that free will exists. We will be forced, against our will, to respond to that super chat.
Like, we have to. We literally can't say no. And so, like, I actually feel like we've got to, this is setting ourselves up for success here. Let's be on the same team here, Grayson. We've got a caller here. He's been waiting for a minute, and I want to apologize again to you know, my lovely atheist callers who are talking about, you know, cool stuff, talking about creation, evolution, things like that. But I'm gonna bring Richard on here. Richard from Texas, pronouns he, him. He's an atheist. And before I bring him in, I'm going to tell you that Richard's coming in hot here, Grayson. He's coming in with one statement, and this is what he says. He says, men are men, women are women, prove me wrong. You ready to have this conversation? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm down for that conversation. I think men are men and women are women, and you can identify however you want.
Richard, can you hear us?
I agree with that.
How are you?
I don't think you. Something tells me that I don't think that you do, and maybe you just weren't understanding what I was saying.
Richard, tell us a little bit more about your position and your question. Let's dig into this, shall we?
Sure. So my position is that men are men, women are women. People can be themselves and be who they want, who they can self-describe themselves in any way that they want. But at the end of the day, people are who they are, not who they imagine that they are. That's my position. And so, I bring that, the reason I... I'm sorry, say again.
You're sneaking in a false premise that like trans women are just imagining that they're women rather than actually being women. So you're just assuming that and just trying to pretend like you've justified that claim somehow, but you haven't.
Okay, well, if a man can be a woman, where's the proof of that? Like, why won't, if a man is truly a woman, why won't? Is that not what you just said? Did you not just say that I was sneaking in this premise that a transgendered person?
Trans women are not men; they are women. So it's not like a man is a woman. A woman is a woman. A trans woman is a woman.
It's a type of woman.
Where's the proof of that? Where's the proof of that? Because I would say that's your faith. That's not fact. That's your faith.
So Richard, can we back up for a minute here? Let me hit
Sure.
you. Let's come at this from a more sociological perspective. When you say men are men and women are women, you're talking about gender there, right? Would you say that that's accurate? You're speaking about gender, or are you wanting to have a conversation about sex? Which of these two are we talking about? Because they're different.
I'm speaking about physics. I'm speaking about physics. I don't want to muddy the water with gender or sex. I'm speaking about physics, atoms, molecules, chemicals.
Richard.
Physics.
Okay.
A man is physically a man. He's not.
Richard, I love physics. You know what? I've taken multiple graduate and undergraduate courses in physics. So why don't you just tell me what is the physics formula for determining man or woman?
If he has a Y chromosome and he's over 18, he's a man. That's the physics formula.
Now that's funny because I took physics. We never learned about the Y chromosome in physics. That was biology, wasn't it?
Well, I took English. And I never learned that someone with a Y chromosome and a penis and a chest full of hair is a woman. I never learned that.
Okay.
So we're even.
Did you ever learn about any of the scientific studies in neuroscience, say, that show pretty definitively that gender and sex are, scientifically speaking, physically speaking, two meaningfully different concepts? This is where this conversation has to begin, is that if you disagree that sex and gender are two different things, then we can't even have this conversation, because you keep conflating it. When you say men are men and women are women, I think what you're saying is that like male sex is always men gender, and you're conflating sex and gender. And I think that we can't even progress this conversation if you won't acknowledge that sex and gender are meaningfully different things.
I'm saying you're equivocating. You want to replace common speech with esoteric niche psychological terminology, and people need, in common speech, when they use words outside of a physics laboratory, those words need to mean something. And when you change the common speech, go ahead.
So I'd like to, if I may, Richard, I want to kind of step in here for a minute, because you talked about how like this is a recent change, how, or at least my inference here is that you're saying that it's only been recent that we've decided that the big WE has decided that gender and sex are actually separate things instead of, being equivocal to one another. But I mean, and I hope that you've heard this before, but from a sociological perspective, there have been cultures all across space and time that have deviated from this binary that you're presenting here, right? There are entire cultures that have third or fourth genders, while still recognizing that the general pattern for humans is, male and female. It's bimodal, right? So these two things are separate. These two things have been decoupled for quite some time in human societies. I don't understand why then, understanding that that's something that's going on for so long in so many different places, why it seems so sudden that we're being consistent in decoupling them here.
Well, it's true that there are other cultures that speak different languages, and their words mean different things and have different connotations within their societies. But in the United States, in the modern world in the United States, man has a very specific meaning and woman has a very specific meaning, or at least it did for a long time, before people who wanted to validate a certain way of thinking decided that a way of doing it would be to change words to mean different things.
Okay, Richard.
Rather than proving that a person...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
There was a little bit of delay on my end. I thought you were done talking, but I want to engage with you on this because it sounds like to me that you're just thinking that for some reason that the common understanding of the common people cannot be wrong. Like, just let me ask you. Back before we learned that dolphins and whales were mammals and not fish, the common person in the street would have said, well, yeah, of course dolphins are fish. You're trying to tell me they're the same as dogs? That makes no sense. The common person would say, words mean something, okay? Dolphin is a fish because that's what the word fish means, and everybody knows what fish means. Now we later on learned, after scientifically rigorous analysis, that actually dolphins are not fish. And scientifically speaking, they are mammals. Now, something similar has happened in our understanding of sex and gender, where we've learned, like, scientifically speaking, like, you can't really argue. They are different. They involve different circuitry in the brain between, like, sex, gender. Sex is a lot more biologically based, but gender still does have biological components in your brain and sociological components. Like, these are meaningfully different terms that can be scientifically, empirically verified to be different things. So it doesn't really matter if you just say Joe Schmo on the street thinks that they're the same, because the scientific evidence shows that it's wrong to think that.
Okay. So if I say I'm a man and someone else says I'm a woman, can you prove one is true or the other is true? Do you have any evidence or just faith in a certain position? Or can you prove that?
So
can you provide evidence?
Richard, I feel like we're really stuck on this. You're not differentiating between sex and gender, right? Like you're not.
I'm not, because I'm using the common language, the way people communicate in everyday interactions. I'm using those homonyms. I'm not using.
How do you know that people's everyday common words of parlance have any basis in the actual objective reality of what is scientifically true and really going on physically in the world? Why would people's common parlance in this bear upon that?
Well, that's my question. I'm asking you where the proof is that that's not the case. I'm asking you, if you won't date a man who claims that he's a woman, or let me even make it more general. If a man says to you, I'm a woman, can you prove that he is, or might he just be saying that and pretending to be a woman?
Confusing sex and gender. Just please ask your question in a consistent way. You understand that I scientifically validly recognize the difference between sex and gender, so please phrase your question in a way that will make sense to me using the proper scientific terminology.
Okay, I'll ask it this way. There are some who would seek to censor or even prosecute people who would disagree with a transgendered person's assertion that he is a woman. Now, do those people have a scientific reason or a scientific line of evidence or proof that that man who's making that claim is really a woman, or is this just an assumption?
So, Richard, like, I wonder if rephrasing that, if repackaging this in a different way might be helpful. So, if I have a sibling who is adopted, right? They call our mother mom, right? So that my mom is their mom, right? But if you were to biologically ask if our mom is my sister's mom, what would you say the answer to that is?
Biologically, no. Biologically, no.
Right. But in parlance, what would you say? In common parlance, as you just said, as you just wanted to make the argument for, is she my sister's mom?
Yes.
Yes, because an adopted mom is a type of mom. And in the same way, a cis woman or a trans woman are both types of women. They both fall under the same category. You see what I'm saying? Because gender is something that is like, it's not tied, as Grayson put it earlier, as strongly to biology. There's some neurochemistry that you can get into there, and those are generalizations at the end of the day. But by and large, sex and gender are, from a biological and social standpoint, these are separate things. And as Grayson made, very clearly, this is something that we can back up with neurobiology. So the question then remains, like, right? What are you asking for here? I think. Okay,
let me turn it around a little. Ask from a different angle. Let me use a different analogy. If I were to say to you, hey, I have a friend. He's single. He's very handsome. I think you two would make a great couple in common speech. If I were to say that to you, would you think that friend had ovarian cancer and a uterus, or would you think I was talking about a male?
What the fuck? Wait. Richard, if I asked you, if I said, look, I have a friend.
Laughing is not an argument, by the way.
And she wants to date you, would you ever think that friend of mine had cancer? No, not cancer.
Ovarian cancer, not cancer. Don't straw man it. Ovarian cancer. You left that piece out. But go ahead.
No, you wouldn't think they would have cancer of any kind, you dullard.
You wouldn't think they would have ovaries. You wouldn't think they had ovaries. That's the point. Don't dance around the point. You knew what I was saying. Don't let's not pretend here.
They might have a freckle on their left toe too. I don't know this person. You've just described them to me. I can't think about, like, oh wow, I know exactly what they look like physically now. I know all their physical features. Like, nobody thinks that way. It's an absurd question.
I mean, Richard, to me, like, when I hear what you're saying here, right, is you're doing like a it's sort of like a thought experiment, right? So you're trying to get Grace and I to say, oh, well, he's using she or he, him pronouns, and therefore the go-to, the automatic response is to assume that we're talking about a cis guy, and since we're talking about a cis guy, we wouldn't assume that he would have ovarian cancer. Like, I get where you're going with that, but to me, because
And you would have been able to,
cis
yeah.
and trans, yeah, because to me, because cis and trans are both types of a person that can exist under the umbrella category of man or woman. You can be a cis man or a trans man, a cis woman or a trans woman, right? Because those are the cases, your example there is no more meaningful to me than if you said, oh, my friend can't wait to meet you. And then you said, would you guess that they had blue hair? It's like, well, no, that wouldn't be my default. But that doesn't mean that blue hair isn't a possibility on the description that you've given me, right?
Well,
like
true,
what I'm trying to impart on you is that it is possible that the friend that you're talking about is actually a transgender man and could actually have ovarian cancer. That is a possibility. Is that my go-to? No, because trans individuals are less common than cis individuals in the population. So of course that's not going to be my go-to thought. But as I ask for more information, that might become a part of the possibility of the person that I'm thinking of. It wouldn't
not
matter,
only that,
but it would be part of something that I would start taking into consideration, much like blue hair.
Not only that, the language used to be more precise, and you could communicate that, you know, ideas in fewer words, and you would know that that was a man without having a science experiment or a discussion about, you know, this, that, and the other thing. It used to be very simple to determine whether or not someone was male or female, because if they were male, you would say he. If they were female, you would say she in common language. Again, I'm not talking about
Richard,
two scientists in a lab studying.
You could make that same argument with an adopted parent. You could make that same exact argument. That you could say, oh, you know, by adding adopted to it, that's making it more complicated. It's like, I don't think it is. It's adding additional information. But that information may or may not be necessary.
This is not logical at all. This argument that you're putting forward is not logical. Erika has already explained to you why it's not logical. I'll just give you one more example, right? I'm trying to set you up with my friend. She's awesome. She's super smart, super funny. And then you meet her and you go like, wow, Grayson, you didn't tell me that she was Sicilian. I was expecting a Mexican chick. And then I'll be like, well, okay, well, yeah,
because
come on. This is the example you're saying.
Yeah,
you're saying that
there's a word called relevancy. There's a word called relevancy. Sicilian is less relevant than penis in that context.
Right. No, because what you're talking about, again, all boils down to the inability or the refusal, I'm not 100% sure which, to recognize the difference between sex and gender. Because I'm married to a cisgender dude. I will be upfront with the fact that I'm like a heterosexual cis woman who's married to, a heterosexual cis guy, right? So sexuality and things like that do come into play as the conversation requires more and more information. In the same way that if you were talking to a doctor, it might be relevant to mention that someone is cis or trans. It might be relevant to mention that you're talking about an adopted or a biological parent, right? These things can come into play. They can be important in certain situations, but in the situation that you just described to me and Grayson, and the one that Grayson described to you, they aren't.
Okay. Well, just to avoid going back and forth, I just had one other. Go ahead, Grayson.
I just wanted to provide you a source to show you what I'm talking about, okay? Like, I don't know where I can send this to you, but I have a 2024 study, the largest long-term brain development study that has ever been done, the most sophisticated one with brain imaging. It literally just came out last month in 2024, and it shows you definitively that sex and gender are biologically, neurologically speaking, two separate things that you cannot conflate as you have been doing. If I showed you this actual data, this actual science, will you learn and stop using sex and gender as the same thing?
Possibly, but my question would be, there can be a lot of things going on inside somebody's mind with the synapses in the brain. I might think I'm 75 years old and I might identify that way, and I truly believe I'm entitled to Social Security payments early. But does that mean you're going to change the language and stop using the word age and like replace it with some euphemism like temporal magnitude and muddy the waters and change everyday speech because of what I think in my mind?
I understand what you're saying, but the problem with that proposal is that what you just talked about has never happened and is not a part of anybody's natural variation, of human natural variation, right? There have been transgender individuals since the dawn of time, since the dawn of society, of human society, and there have been societies that recognize genders outside of the bimodal male and female. There are also societies that don't recognize that, and there are societies that don't recognize that gay people exist. Russia's a great example. They say there's no gay people over there. I don't believe that that's true. I mean, you can deny the existence of an entire sect of people, but that doesn't make
I think
them
that's wrong. I think that's wrong, but go ahead.
You think what's wrong?
No, I think that's Iran. I don't think Russians don't believe it.
Iran.
Maybe they do, but I've never heard. Okay.
I could be wrong. I thought I heard back when the Ukraine stuff was first
Iran.
starting that was the case.
That's something that the Iranian government made some kind of a statement like that. Yeah, go ahead.
Some country has done that, right? Like a country has not recognized the existence of an entire group of people, but that doesn't mean that that group of people doesn't exist. The fact that we see transgender individuals and other genders outside of the typical bimodal male and female throughout human history indicates to me, at least, that this is a natural part of human variation and has been for a very long time. Now, it might be that we have to adapt our language as we recognize that humans are a little bit more complicated than we previously thought. I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, as Grayson said, if we can back this up with science, and we can, then this is something that is, in my opinion, progress, right? This is something we're moving towards being more correct in our language uses, towards being more precise in what we mean. And I just don't see it as a bad thing.
Okay. That's really all I had. I just wanted to go back and forth a couple times and see what your position was. So I'll let you continue with the show, unless there's anything else.
Richard, try calling the Transatlantic call-in show on Thursday.
Transatlantic. Okay.
Yeah. And
okay, thank you so much.
Just in case, it was called the ABCD study in 2024, the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study in 2024. You can find it, has its own website if you want to see anything about their methodology. And I hope that you do read it and you look at the actual evidence. And even if you don't all of a sudden overnight, you're like, oh, trans women are women. But you can at least see that sex and gender are different. And that will allow you to see, well, hey, wait a minute. If there's actual structure in the brain that is indicative that a person's lived experience is as the gender that they are identifying as, and you can see the data yourself, I mean, I think that should be able to show you what the actual reality of the situation is, and that maybe just the colloquial words that just random people in the street were using as just everybody knows this is common knowledge. Maybe it's time update our language to better reflect the objective reality of the situation and go with the data and evidence. And I think that that's what we have done. And gender and sex are different, and trans women are women. There you go. Thanks for calling.
Yep.
Thank you, Richard. We'll post. Well, actually, we might. Grayson, if you get around to it, it'd be wonderful if you posted the link in the description. So if Richard is around, he can go and check it out. That's it. I struggle to see how we're still at the point where folks don't recognize that gender and sex are different things. Like, I feel like this isn't that new. I feel like this has been a concept that we've appreciated for decades. I mean, I knew the difference growing up. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Same for me. Like, I grew up understanding the difference. I find that very difficult to believe that this is a stumbling block for so many folks. I mean, my parents know that there's a difference, right? Like, it's just
so oftentimes people whose parents sheltered them from knowledge like this because their parents didn't want them to understand that these were different, because they didn't want them to become exposed to ideology outside of the sheltered growing up. But I think that those people specifically perceive that there's been this massive change in the world, because when they were growing up, they didn't know any of this stuff because their parents intentionally kept that information from them. And then when they grew up and they were confronted with the real world and their parents couldn't shelter them from the internet anymore, suddenly, hey, why is everything so different?
Well, and it's like, it's such a little thing to do. Like, it's such a nothing burger of a switch as well. Like, oh, oops, our language is getting more precise than it was previously. Like, I just don't think that's a big deal. I really don't. But
especially when we can show empirically that that our update of the language is getting closer to the like empirical reality of the world around us. Like that's a good thing when we get more precise language.
Yeah, and matches what some cultures have recognized for quite some time, right? I mean, you gotta call a spade a spade. It's not like this is coming out of the blue, has never before been seen in any human society ever. It's popped up many times in cultures that like recognize the ability of these folks to exist, right? It's just
it's probably much older than transphobia. Like
it probably is. I mean, I just like, I don't know. I'm trying to imagine, explaining to like an indigenous group that their concept of two-spirit people, right, is like completely inaccurate, and they should just throw that to the wind, and that it's a newfangled, push by the woke mob, and it's like this has been in their culture for centuries, right?
Think about it trying to explain to like an indigenous two-spirit person that actually that's woke. Try to explain what woke is. Yeah, try to explain to them what woke is.
Yeah, this is the woke left is pushing this on you guys. They actually time traveled hundreds of years into the past and introduced this just for this punchline hundreds of years later, right? Like, that's just a stretch to me. And like, the killer part is that the science does bear this out, right? And these citations are not difficult to find, and they're not difficult to access, right? Even the ones that are behind a paywall, you can access summaries of them. I think a lot of the time this can be boiled down to kind of what you were getting at earlier, Grayson, which is like, oh, this is a new thing, and I have not been exposed to it before, and I do not like it, and therefore it must be some kind of existential threat to the West. It's like, okay, all right. I don't know how you respond to that. Other than just like, here's the studies. So what can you do? And that was a good call, though. That was a fun little hash out.
Mm-hmm. So I wasn't expecting the atheist scholars to be starting arguments.
Well, I know, and so I saw it, and I was like, I despite being an atheist caller, I did, and I'm sorry, callers on the line, I did give preference to them because it was like, okay, I was like, this is going to be an interesting call, right? Not a theist, but certainly controversial between the two of us. I mean, I vehemently disagree. So
it's really bizarre, right? Because I feel like we almost didn't have the theist caller that we had almost didn't disagree with anything we were saying. I feel like we were kind of butting heads for that one a bit. Not butting heads, but like we were going back and forth and having a dialogue. And then the caller like didn't really seem to disagree with either of us. He didn't really put forward a third. And then the atheist caller calls in, and all of a sudden, like, I'm like, I don't know, like, that was the most heated I've been all night, so.
I know. No, I know. The theist caller was like, yeah, dude, I'm not going to defend pantheism because I don't feel strongly about it yet. I don't feel like I can make the case. And we were like, okay, call back when you can. That dude was cool. Like, but yeah, no, I was not expecting that. So I'm going to let everybody know that we have two more callers. They're both atheists and they're both fairly non-controversial. We're going to take these calls, but if you are a theist out there and you want to call in and hash out, please, someone call and fight with me and Grayson about evolution. I'm on my hands and knees begging. Abiogenesis, Grayson would love that. He loves abio. I don't like it as much, but I feel like I always get my way with the primate conversation. So call about abio, call about evolution, please. We'll take Bigfoot calls. We'll take a paranormal activity calls. I love that kind of stuff. Call in. Let's fight in a friendly way. And in the meantime, we're going to take our longest waiting caller. This is Rich, pronouns he, him. He's an atheist from New York. His call title says Creation Evolution. So, I'm optimistic. I want to hear what Rich has to say. Rich, welcome to SkepTalk. Can you hear us?
Hello, Erika. How you doing? How you doing, Grayson?
We're well. How are you?
All right. So my discussion isn't about evolution versus creationism in the technical sense. It's more about changing the argument. I think part of the argument, and I've been thinking about complexity, the word complexity, and it being such a human construct. But within nature, and I guess complexity is a very descriptive term for us to describe what's going on in nature. But I don't know if that's really, I think getting caught up in our human construct and our limitation of understanding nature, that's where we get caught up in this battle. Well, it's just so complex. But even abiogenesis, like a lot of people say, well, where did life start? In nature, there is this lab that you have 10,000 experiments going on a second, right? Say, for instance, with abiogenesis around the world, whenever it happened, X number of billion years ago, it didn't happen in this one spot. It was this constant, and at least this is what I've heard. Basically, the hypothesis is it was this constantly thing going on until the right combination of factors were hit. As soon as those right factors hit, it happened. So when we talk about like the flagellum and stuff and the complexity of it, to nature, that's not complex. It's only complex to us trying to understand it, and that's how we get. I'm just trying to figure out a different way of changing this argument of creationism versus evolution to blunt that creationist argument before it even starts. Am I making any sense to either one of you?
No, like completely. I get what you're going for. Grayson, you take us away. You start us off here.
I was just say, if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm hearing that it sounds like maybe you're tired of the same old creation evolution argument, because the creationists will just always just inevitably get stuck on this idea of life is just so complex. It's so complicated that it had to have been designed. And they get stuck on this idea of complexity equals design. But I guess in my own experiences with theoretic creationists, I tend to just sort of attack this idea that creationists have, that complexity must therefore equal design, and just come at it from that route, rather than saying that, well, things aren't actually complex at all. That's just a subjective categorization that we humans are applying to things that maybe are too busy for us to understand. I do think that there is some idea in the scientific fields to try to maybe come up with some sort of way to objectively categorize complexity in a way. I'm thinking specifically of Lee Cronin's assembly theory that he put forward, I think, last year. And I'm not a big proponent of Lee Cronin. I'm not saying that I accept his assembly theory, but the basic idea of it is that you can, through like an objective system, right? That you can say, look, these types of molecules get this score in complexity. And his argument is that only life is capable of generating molecules that have a certain high level of assembly number. And this could actually be useful for like looking for life outside of our solar system, for example. If you look at distant planets and you say, look, they've got chemicals that have this high level of complexity. They have this certain score on their assembly score. And life is the only thing that we know of that can generate molecules with that level of assembly involved. So I can see it having actual practical uses to have some sort of objective way to classify complexity. And I know that Lee Cronin and others are working on developing something like that. It's definitely not like all the kinks have been worked out. It's the consensus, and this is the way it is. It's just this is the assembly theory model. But I do think that there could be some benefits for looking at it that way and maintaining this idea of complexity. I do think that it can serve a benefit.
I think so, it is. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Erika.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I get what you're saying, but all of that again is for our understanding. But I don't. What I'm saying is this example: you have
you have nuclear fusion in the suns, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no assembly that says, okay, let's get this hydrogen and these tritiums and let's bring them together to make this helium. And then when it explodes, we're going to get these other things. None of those are steps within. Those are steps within nature for us to explain what happens. But within nature, that step is totally oblivious to almost, in a sense, in using human construct the word oblivious. Once you get to a certain height, say for instance in that second generation star, that second generation star is there. It doesn't have any. Oh God, it's so hard to explain. It has a lot to do with that first generation star because we have to put it in those steps. But once that second generation star is there, it's there, and then when it explodes, that iron comes out, or whatever comes out in that second generation. I think it's carbon. I forgot exactly what it is. But my point is that, Grayson, I understand exactly what you're saying. For us to make sense of us to build a system to understand it, we do need those systems, and we do need to understand it. And to us, it's complex. But in nature, it just happens. It's not complex in nature. It's complex in our description of nature. But go ahead.
Rich,
Go ahead, Erika.
I'm totally with you, and I think Grayson is too, right? Like we quantify complexity because it makes it easier for us to understand. We do this with a lot of stuff, right? Species is my go-to example, right? We have these units that appear discrete, and we use them to communicate what we're talking about to one another. But species in reality is a messy concept that doesn't seem to be a biological reality in the way that we want it to be. And when we're talking about something like complexity, because it's so useful to use when we're communicating with each other, I think it can often get misconstrued and weaponized by creationists. So what I normally do when we're having conversations about, well, how could such a complex structure evolve? Do you have any idea how many microscopic steps it would take to reach this working system, each step of which is dependent on every other step? Well, I point to the formation of ecosystems. Right? We have ecosystems all over the world that we've observed form on like primary succession, in islands and things of that nature. And we've watched these ecosystems form on which every individual is a part of a population, and every population is interdependent on every other population of plant and animal and fungus and all sorts of different things. These systems are unimaginably complex. They work perfectly. They're self-correcting in many ways, barring external circumstances that throw them out of whack, right? But these things are marvelous. And yet no one looks at an ecosystem and says that this had to be intelligently designed. It happens because every individual unit within this system is responding to every other unit. And the same is true when we're talking about abiogenesis or the complexity of given structures. These things appear too complex to form because we're looking at them in the last stage. We're looking at them in their most complex, if you will, form possible, without considering that each one of these parts was and indeed did form to be a functional unit in and of itself, right? So that's what I point to. I point to the formation of ecosystems as this trump card for complexity. We see complex things form all the time. Or I point to the fact, like when we're talking about things like information, a great many things that we would consider less advanced than humans have far more genes and far more complex genomes. Right? Onions have like 5 times, 10 times, something like that, the amount of genes that humans have. Does that make them more complex than us? Well, I would wager if you asked a creationist, the answer would be no, because it's an onion and we eat onions and onions are stupid and grow in the ground. But it's like from a genomic standpoint, they're quite complex, no? So you can point to all of these different aspects in nature and say, here we see complex things form. We see things with more amount of information, quote unquote, than we see in humans or in other sort of higher order critters. And yet we have no problem swallowing that pill. So let's back up and ask the question, why is this pill hard to swallow?
Well, can I,
see what I mean?
Before Rich answers, can I try to steel man what Rich is saying to make sure that I understand him? Rich, basically, if I'm hearing you, you're saying that the very designation of complex is subjective. There is no objective standard by which you can argue that something is complex because it's complex relative to what? It's like saying, there's nothing that's tall to nature because nature isn't comparing anything's height. Like, it's not like nature has a designation of tall, because for an ant, a blade of grass is tall, and for me, a skyscraper is tall, and that's not going to be tall if you're talking about a star or something. So obviously, there's no tallness in nature. So is that what you're arguing? Is that there's no complexity in nature because complexity is just a subjective human category? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's so funny. You hit almost like on it, because we think in magnitudes. And I've made this argument about magnitude in other ways too, but it's going to the same thing: big, small, short, skinny, fat, gigantic, whatever. All these things are just our descriptors of what we see. And in that same thing, I think I think your phrasing is really good on this. And so I think you sort of hit on what I'm trying to say. The reason I called is for something like this between what you and Erika have said, because I've been trying. I don't sit down and think about this, but it's always flashing through my mind. Like, I'll think about this during the day. I always say, I got to sit down and think about it. Then I saw you two, and I said, okay, these two nerds are like me. All three of us are nerdy as hell, and we'll just, we'll probably lose ourselves in this conversation. So, to that point, so part of what I'm trying to say is, how do we approach the creationists and all these other things? And to your point, Erika, you don't hear any creationists having a problem with what we're discovering, what's happening in the forest, and how trees will literally move their branches to let the other tree get sun. And that those things are absolutely mind-blowing. And what's going on with mycelia. And I'm getting into redwoods and stuff, because I love those trees. How you actually have to have a grove of them so that they can support each other in their root systems and help each other to live, because they live 10 times more healthier in that grove. So to your point, all of this stuff that we accept at face value, including the Christians, except when it comes to saying that maybe the mycelia are just a little bit more complex than the average human being, then all of a sudden they lose their goddamn mind. So I think
we could definitely could nerd out about mycorrhizal networks all day on this program. I'm right there. But this is the point that I will make, because I think I understand what you're saying, but I think ultimately it still does matter, even if the designation of complicated or complex is subjective and there isn't really an objective complex thing out there. I still think that it matters, even though it's subjective, because ultimately we're trying to combat the creationist ideology and the creationist arguments. And I think ultimately the creationist argument is a subjective one. I mean, they're saying that I am designating this item as too complex to have come about naturally. And so it doesn't really matter if that thing is objectively complex or not. All that matters is that they have labeled it as they subjectively think this is too complex to evolve. And so I think that it still is a good strategy to sort of counteract this whole point about complexity, to just disentangle the entire notion that there's any relationship between something's complexity and whether or not it could come about naturally and requires a designer. Yeah. I think just disentangling that is just the best way to progress the conversation forward with creationists.
So that's actually why I like the ecosystem example so much, is because it's this system with just an insane amount of cogs at play here, so many interdependent relationships, and if you take one out, right, the whole thing starts to crumble, or at least much of it begins to be thrown out of whack. If we're talking about populations, you pull one out, and it takes a while for it to correct itself. But how is this not, just kicked my cart here, how is this not analogous to the evolution of something like the bacterial flagellum? I mean, part of the reason why they like that case so much is because they say, look, all of these parts are interdependent on one another. If you take one out, the whole thing collapses. So how do you get this to evolve? And the answer is that every part evolves stepwise in tandem with one another, right? It's not like one has to evolve fully and then the second. I mean, this is just a more complicated version of Kent Hovind's if sex is evolved, how's the male evolve first and then wait around for the female to evolve? I mean, it's silly. right? So breaking this down, as Grayson said, and then giving it real world examples, things that you know they will accept, that you can easily provide examples for, is a really quick way to shut this down at the gate. Because if you can show something more complex than a bacterial flagellum, and I would propose that many ecosystems are, and say, we accept that this evolves naturally, why not this? And that completely, as Grayson said, disentangles the argument, the complexity and the evolvability from one another.
Yep, and we're learning every day. I mean, look at this dark oxygen, which they've been discussing the last 2 weeks. All of a sudden, we have this ecosystem at the bottom of this ocean that literally, if you remove those nodules of different metals and stuff, it dies. But we didn't know that until what? In the last, well, the scientists have probably known it for a while, but publicly they've come out with these articles. So to your point, the complexity is.
I was just going to say,
thank
you for bringing dark oxygen. That was the coolest story ever the last week. I just love that story. And yes, the scientists first discovered this in like 2013. That's when they first got the results. That oxygen was freaking coming out of the ocean floor. And they were like, well, what is this? And they said, no, that doesn't make any sense. That's got to be wrong. So then they went back and did it again. It's not like the creationist conspiracy that, our results conflicted with our paradigm. Quick, cover it up, delete the paper trail. No, they went back and they did it again, and they double and triple and quadruple checked their results, and they figured out, hey, wait a minute, this is real, this is happening. Let's change the paradigm. Let's figure out what's actually going on here. And then they literally spent like a decade gathering all the data, so they had a foolproof case, and they had the evidence that was required to overturn the paradigm, the consensus, and then they did it. They demonstrated it. They overturned the consensus. They proposed a potential hypothesis, which is awesome. Electrochemistry is the freaking best, but we don't know. This dark oxygen could be coming from another means. It's super exciting. It's what science is all about, and it literally shows that the kind of straw man version of science that creationists try to tell, like it's all one big conspiracy and you can't put forward anything that goes against the consensus, is just a complete fabrication. The real science is so much cooler than what the creationists are afraid of.
Well, and you can spend 5 minutes with anybody who's actually in the field and this comes to light, right? Like everybody's got their cool, every scientist in the field has that cool story where they're like, oh my gosh, like this was not expected. And open questions don't scare people who are in science, they excite them. This is a huge difference between dogma and what science is. When the paradigm is challenged, people get psyched because that's an open avenue, baby. That's inquiry to the highest degree. That's what it's all about, right? Like it's cool.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about it, to what Grayson was saying, they literally sent all their measuring equipment back to the manufacturer and told them it was broke. But now we have this. All of a sudden, we have this new ecosystem that all these beautiful animals we've been seeing at the bottom of the ocean. All of a sudden, maybe we just can't suck all these nodules up to get the metals out of them because we may destroy an entire ecosystem. And I don't think 30 years ago, if we would have started this, we wouldn't have had the science to know it, and would have been too late. We actually have parts of the ocean that are desert because of the things we've done, because we didn't know these new facts and these new discoveries. It's amazing and it's great. But yeah, I think you guys have helped me a lot. You two have helped me a lot with coming to a better way of formulating my argument. And
wonderful.
Love to hear it.
Okay, I'll let you guys get going. Have a good night.
Thanks so much, Rich.
Yep. Bye.
See, that's a fun call. That's the other side of the fun. There's like the fun calls that make me mad, and then there's the fun calls that are like uplifting and enjoyable.
Erika, I gotta say, I was secretly hoping that somehow, some way, someone would bring up this dark oxygen thing. I don't know why, but it was like one of the coolest things that I read about in the last week. Yeah. And I was just like, wow, it'd be so cool if somebody could bring this up for some reason. And like, it happened. It's awesome. I just love that.
I feel like between that and the leopard spots on Mars, the potential, it's like a stromatolite-like, structure, something along those lines. It's like, man, it's a good week for extremophilic organisms. It's a really good week to be an extremophilic critter. Like, that's so cool. It's crazy.
it's always a good week to be an extremophile. Let's be real.
It's always a good week to be an extremophile, baby.
They literally they cannot have a bad day. Like, what are you going to throw at an extremophile? What are you going to throw at him to ruin his day? Like, come on. You can't throw lava. You can send a guy into space. You can shoot him out a gun. You can freeze him. He's going to be fine. They don't care.
They don't care. They are unbothered. They're moisturized. They're staying in their lane. They're having a good time. I mean, it's like, it reminds me of the there's like a viral Melody Sheep video. You know, it's like the timeline of the end of the universe or something like that. And it's like the very last thing to die on Earth. It's like subterranean extremophiles. Like they're just big chillin' like a billion years from now. Like life is, the magnetic fields are gone. Like the atmosphere's been stripped from the Earth, and it's just like, nah, they're fine. They're just they're rolling. They're having a good.
All learn a thing or two from our extremophile ancestors and cousins.
Absolutely. It's called triumph and bear down in the face of adversity, right? Like just keep trucking. Be an extremophile. So we have one more call. And I'm gonna take this one. I think we can do this one pretty quick. This is actually on another more recent paper that I'm excited for. This is Janis he, him from Tennessee. He's an atheist and he wants to talk about a recent study about Neanderthals with regard to autism. So, Janis, you are on SkepTalk. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful. Tell me a little bit more about your question.
So I read the paper last month, I think it was last month, in Molecular Psychiatry, which basically referenced that the 1 to 2% of all genetic code that all Homo sapiens have as Asian and European Homo sapiens have as a carryover from Neanderthals, may the traits that were inherited by neurotypicals are different than the traits that were inherited by people who are susceptible to autism. And so part of my question is, I'm kind of wondering, well, what was the evolutionary cause of that? There are certain things from a sensory perspective that somewhat make sense to me, like if it was a tribe of Neanderthals who needed extreme sensitivities to darkness and sound in order for protection and being able to be cave dwellers, maybe something like that. Just kind of curious to the development of this science and ultimately what it means to the neurodevelopmental differences between neurotypical people and neurodivergent people.
So I'll kick this one off because I have some thoughts. So I'm always wary of lines that are drawn like that even kind of traipse on that border of evolutionary psychology. But if memory serves, this paper did like a decent job drawing connections from like actual genes that are known to be associated with like neurodivergent conditions and things of that nature. So if that is the case, right? If it is the case that individuals who are neurodivergent, that you can trace some of those to Neanderthals, that's fascinating for a few reasons. The first is because we know, looking at the Neanderthal genome, that there's actually heavy selection against the majority of Neanderthal genes as they were introgressing into human populations. So it's fascinating that these particular genes persisted, right? That suggests, as you've kind of alluded to here, that there may be some kind of selective benefit towards certain portions, certain aspects of being neurodivergent that allowed them to proliferate and stick around within the human population. I think it's not all that surprising that we call what is effectively the Neanderthal state of being, if we're taking this study and these connections at face value, right? They're subject to change. I understand that. But if it is the case that Neanderthals were more likely to be neurodivergent compared to modern humans, or if that was even just a common state of being with them, those guys did pretty dang well for themselves. They persisted on planet Earth from 400,000 years ago to about 40,000 years ago, which is, pretty dang longer than humans have been around, or nearly longer than humans have been around. It depends on what you count as bona fide Neanderthals. Now, these guys had a very different organization to their brains as compared to Homo sapiens, at least if we're just comparing the two species. Now, overall, they're very, very similar, but if you want to make some generalizations, you could look at Neanderthals and say that they've got a heavy emphasis on the occipital lobe as compared to the frontal, the frontal being responsible for a lot of executive functions and the occipital being responsible for hand-eye coordination and a lot of sensory stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of that is coming from that emphasis on the occipital in Neanderthals, if that truly is a holdover. But what's kind of more interesting with that is that based off of the organization of Neanderthals, we've made some inferences as to how they would have gotten along with one another socially. And it seems to be that Neanderthals lived in these very small groups, even when there were quite a few of them on the earth. Like they were inbred later in life because there weren't very many of them and their groups were very spread out. But even when Neanderthals were doing just fine, they lived in these small groups. Well, maybe they just had proclivities, maybe socially speaking, they just preferred smaller groups of more intimately related, closely related individuals as opposed to the larger groups that Homo sapiens are. Yeah, a lot of people do, right? And some people do and some people don't. And some people link that to certain characteristics and some people don't. What I'm trying to emphasize here overall, what I'm trying to point out is that Neanderthals were ridiculously similar to humans, but they also had some differences that can be tied to inferred differences in social behavior. And if it is the case, and these differences in social behavior didn't doom them, they weren't negative, right? Like they helped them survive and thrive in the environments that they lived in. So if it is the case that some of those characteristics can be linked to autism and the like, and some of those, despite the fact that the human genome has experienced heavy selection against Neanderthal characteristics, that has managed to persist to present, suggests to me that in some groups of humans, in some individuals of humans, it simply must have been useful, especially considering those introgressions happened quite some time ago. Does that help answer your question a little bit?
I think so. And I'm assuming there's a lot more research that still needs to be done on this. My understanding, my field is in statistics and data analysis, so I come at this to the best I can. My understanding was more of the bits that were inherited by people who are susceptible to the spectrum were different than the bits inherited by neurotypical.
So
and I'm just kind of curious what might have been. Basically a genomic.
You cut out there for just a second. Just will you repeat yourself one more time for me?
Right. So my understanding in the study and what was that essentially it's the specific genes that people on the spectrum inherited are within that 1% to 2%, bit that's left over from the Neanderthals is different than the genes inherited by neurotypical people or people not susceptible to the spectrum.
Right.
That makes
sense. And that could be, that could be the case. I mean, that could be what is in part adding to the specific condition of these neurodivergent people. We don't know. I don't think that we've hammered that home yet. But the point that I was trying to make is that, yes, a lot of people have some degree of Neanderthal in them, but the Neanderthal genes that have survived to present, at least as far as I know, must have had some kind of selective benefit given the history of selecting against Neanderthal characteristics. So I don't know necessarily, people try to, there's an ableist sort of slant that sometimes you see where it's like, oh, the neurodivergent condition is negative or whatever. But to me, what this says is that Neanderthals existed in sort of a different state, maybe one that we would even consider today being neurodivergent as compared to humans. And those characteristics were very beneficial to them. So when we see them in modern individuals, that might have a very long history.
Yes, that's kind of been my assumption and kind of the way I've started reframing my discourse when discussing autism with people is that it's not purely a divergence. It's just due to evolutionary history, we maintain certain alleles that made our ancestors more fit at one point than others.
If I could weigh in real quick. So at first when you brought up this question, I got excited because I thought I had actually read the Neanderthal study that you were going to bring up, but I was getting it confused with a Neanderthal study from last month that I read that I got excited about, where they found that Neanderthal community had actually been taking care of a Down syndrome child that had been living amongst them. Yeah. And so that is awesome for some of the social dynamics of what it was like to be a Neanderthal. So that's what I thought you were going to bring up. So I haven't actually read this specific study, but it's really fascinating, and I want to go back and reread it because it sounds really interesting. The initial, like, my initial thoughts on it before having read it with that big old grain of salt was that I have heard what Erika was referring to about there being like a negative selection on a lot of Neanderthal genes. Um, and so my initial thought was, how do we know that this was selected for and not some sort of genetic drift or something? But I could buy it as being some sort of positive selection as well. And the reason is because diverse populations are typically more fit ones because they can handle a more robust variety of different changing conditions if they have more diversity in that population. So that could be like, it could be that if you have a more neurodiverse population, then that population as a whole might be more successful because it can handle a larger variety of different situations, and it can bring a different variety of thought processes to things that maybe it's not that, that this specific configuration of neurodivergence is being selected for. Maybe it's a selection on the population as a whole that's just selecting neurodiversity in general because it benefits the population as a whole.
I'll re-listen to that section. I caught most of it, but I need to sit and think about your wording for a moment. So I'll re-listen to that section later. Thank you. This paper is by Emily Casanova from Loyola.
Yeah, I think to kind of summarize, we're just not 100% sure which genes are responsible for what yet. Grayson makes a good point about genetic drift. I was kind of more inclined towards positive selection just because we're looking at like a relatively short amount of time and a relatively strong selection against most Neanderthal genes. So I'm thinking like if it's still here, there's got to be some kind of benefit, but that's pretty adaptionist, honestly. Like that's very much in the adaptionist paradigm. So like I don't, that might not be the case. Maybe it is drift. I think we're just not sure. I hope what we've offered has at least like given some food for thought as to maybe what's going on. Neither Grayson and I are geneticists, but we dabble.
I've taken
I appreciate it.
Wonderful, Janice. That's so good to hear. Do you have any more questions?
No, it would require us to research a lot more about this paper. So, no.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, thank you so much for calling.
All right, thank you.
Take care. Yeah, dude, that Down syndrome paper is so cool. That one is so interesting. I think it's a little petrosal, yeah? That's the bone that they found that has the morphology for a Down syndrome individual, and they're not a baby, like they're quite old. They were definitively cared for.
I think they might have been 6 or something like that. Yeah, definitely not an infant. So I thought that was the coolest study. I thought that's what we were going to be talking about with Neanderthals, but that was still really interesting. I'm definitely going to be checking out that study.
Yeah, there's a lot that still needs to be sussed out, I think, especially like definitively linking genes to neurological characteristics, I think. But
exactly, like right from the very beginning, when you're talking about like genes causing autism, you're already just walking on so many eggshells to try to claim that as your starting base.
Well, and like there's the bit too where it's like people in general, brains are very bizarre and they don't seem to react universally to the same things. So there's a lot going on there that I at least don't understand, but I think it's a cool starting place. And
Erika,
I've been reading for so.
Oh, I was gonna say, I don't know if you know this, but I did work in a neuroscience lab in my undergrad for like 2.5 years.
So
And I've put the caps on people. I've put them through the exact same tests as everybody else. I've done this for like, I think our sample size was a couple hundred people. Like, put them through the ringer, put them through the same test as everybody else, and just being like, what is going on with your brain, sir? What, like, this is like, you are reacting totally different than everybody else. Like there's just so much diversity in anatomy. Like, I've even worked in operating rooms, like on like in spine surgeries, and the amount of a difference in anatomy in people's spines. Like sometimes the surgeon will just open up somebody's back and be like, "Oh, this person's got an extra vertebra." Like it's like this person's got anatomy I've never seen before in 40 years in working here. It's just like there's so much variety.
When I took gross anatomy this time last year, when we were working with the cadavers, when we were doing upper arms on, or like the upper limb on the cadaver, the brachial plexus, like it's supposed to be like here-ish. In some people, it's way down here. In some people, it's like almost in the thorax. Like it's a really, really weird situation. And that's like a basic thing that everyone has. Like human variety is astonishing. And I was once told in the brain evolution class I took several years ago that it's like, if you're a neurosurgeon, every case is different. It doesn't matter if you're looking at the exact same pathology, every case is different. Once you crack open that skull, people are going to react in different ways. Some brains are more plastic than others. Like it's kind of a crapshoot what's going to happen. So
bodies are weird, man, and brains are even weirder.
The wrinkly tapioca ball that's in charge of you is just a mystery. Like we don't know anything about that thing. And then there's the thing too, where it's like the gastrointestinal system is just, it's such a mass. It has such a massive portion of the nervous system dedicated to it. Like that whole thing is bizarre. The interaction between that, I mean, they're doing a bunch of shit with like microbiomes and your mental well-being. I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know if that's woo. I don't know if there's support for it.
I literally just cannot get over the fact that you just described a brain as a wrinkly tapioca ball. Is that?
That's what it is. You know I'm right. That is what it is. That's the consistency.
After you said that, I don't even know if I could hear anything else that you were saying, because I was just like, oh my God. Like, I'm just like coming to an existential realization. Like, I'm just a wrinkly tapioca ball. Oh.
Grayson, when we hemisected the brains in gross anatomy, the tool that you use to hemisect the brain, I mean, you probably know this, it looks like a big butter knife. And the weight of that thing just placed on the top of the brain, sinking down, could hemisect it. I mean, the brain is so like, it's tapioca ball. That's what it is. Like, you could just like, and it's in charge. And if anything in it goes wrong, you're dead. Like, it's the spookiest thing. I hate it. I hate the brain, and I am one.
Or you could also just miss half of your brain and be fine.
And you're fine. Right. Or speaking, and I believe this is true. I think this is the right person. My husband and I were litigating this the other day, so hopefully the chat can tell me if this is not true. So potential vice president nominee Mark Kelly, his wife was I think she was a congresswoman in Arizona, and she got shot in the head. I think that's her. And if this is the woman that I'm thinking of. No, she didn't die. She survived because she was shot in the head and it obliterated. I think it was Wernicke's region. The speech production is it Broca or Wernicke that's for speech production? Broca's area. Broca's area. Her Broca's area was just obliterated, right? Like it does not work anymore. And so when she survived, when she comes to, she can't speak anymore. She can understand speech perfectly fine. But she can't actually produce it. And that's already really weird that those two regions are in different spots in your brain. But she can talk again because she re-taught herself how to speak by singing and then reverting that singing to staccato, because singing is a completely different portion of your brain. So her Broca's area is still destroyed, but she can speak by singing in a specific way. It's the coolest thing. It's nuts. Like, anyways.
That's literally like the coolest thing ever. I want to issue an apology to Mark Kelly's wife, because I thought that you were dead. I'm super sorry about that. You recovered in like literally the most amazing way possible. So thank you for setting the record straight on that, Erika. And I did. You know what? When we first came out of this, I said I want to learn something new, and I did. So thank you, Erika, for teaching me something new here.
What a badass, though, right? Like, that's the thing. When my husband and I were talking about it, I was like, oh my God, it should be Mark Kelly because his wife's a badass. Like, clearly if he can pick a wife like that, the man could be a vice president, right? Like, what a badass. You should get shot in the head, and she's like, I'm not going to let this stop me. She relearns that. It's just the coolest thing. Anyway, should we do super chats? I think we should.
And loyal and reliable for sticking by her side throughout that whole process. So, just saying.
Pretty cool. Our first super chat is $5 from William Matz. By reading this, you have in fact unequivocally lost a...
William!
That's not cool. That's not cool, William. I guess thanks for the $5, but that's not cool.
I'm not going to thank anyone that
$5 Canadian dollars from Sergius Maximus. The something from nothing people are the most entertaining. No, they are not the most entertaining. They actually shave weeks off of my life by impacting the walls of my heart because my blood pressure goes up so much. Arguing with them is like arguing with the brick wall. And I know because I've been arguing with many Twitter creationists over the past several months. I have a problem.
It really is insane the number of people who tell you that you believe that something came from nothing.
Yeah. Or that you came from a rock.
Yeah, or a dot of nothing that exploded.
Yeah. $5 Australian from Ruben Monzo, Creation and Evolution. If I were in charge of creating life on Earth, I'd like to think I was smart enough to include a self-correction algorithm. That's what I'm always saying. This is why I'm always gassing up my theistic evolution viewers and friends in my life, because it's like, if you're going to be a theist, the smartest thing God could possibly do is create a system that is perfect for maintaining life at all costs, natural selection, right? A mutation to introduce new variation, drift, sexual selection, gene flow, like all of this is so wonderful. And then it's just like you set it up and you let it go. And that is a perfect explanation for why we have so many convoluted bullshit structures in us. Like,
yeah, that does offer an interesting question as who is a more intelligent designer? An intelligent designer who created all life in the best state that it's going to be separately, and then it just degrades over time and just wears away to nothing due to genetic entropy, and we all die, the end. Or the intelligent designer who maybe was more of a deistic conception, who set the whole thing going in this wonderful system that evolves and gets better over time. So it's totally hands off. It doesn't degrade. It doesn't like go down over time. It evolves. It gets more adapted to its environment. That sounds like a much more intelligent design to me.
This is what I'm saying. And like the creationists who are like the literalists, they just have awful hermeneutics. And, you know, we could go down that rabbit hole as well. Like, you know, I'm the beloved fence-sitting agnostic here, but I look at the hermeneutics of the creationists. I'm like, no, like you're not actually listening to real biblical scholars who themselves are doing the work on the interpretation on this. You're just reading the English version of the King James and running with it. That's psychotic. Like, I cannot imagine defending that.
Do you know how many people have told me personally that if evolution is true, then God cannot exist? Like, as an if-then statement, these people have told me that. It's like,
it's unreal to me.
Like, yeah, it's like you've never met any of the millions of Christians who are theistic evolutionists, like the majority of religious people in the world. Like, come on.
Like that blows my mind. And it's like, there's another conversation we can have about like reasons to be a theist versus not, right? That's a separate conversation. And, but you know, evolutionary theory wasn't what did it for me. That I'll be honest. Like, that's not what booted me from the saddle. $5 from James Rhodes. If you're in your best Kent Hovind, if evolutionists believe we came from rocks, why are there still rocks?
That was pretty good.
It's not. You should see Dr. Josh Bowen's. His is nuts. £5 from Mystic Mind Analysis to Grayson and Erika. What are your favorite dinosaurs? That's a wonderful question. My favorite dinosaur. Specific Mesozoic dinosaur. I think my favorite, and it's got to be a dinosaur, so no marine reptiles and no pterosaurs. I think my favorite might be... It's either Achilobator or Pachycephalosaurs. So either a very feathery raptor or a dome-headed moron. Those are my favorites.
Erika, while we were in Wyoming, we met a local paleontologist who is an expert on Pachycephalosaurs. So
what does he think? Does he think Does he think that they were actually smashing their heads together? And does he think that we're looking at lots of species or lots of morphs?
I know this is going to be opening up like the Pandora's box, because if you guys don't know about like the Pachycephalosaurus like freaking literature right now, that's that is a blood feud basically. And she actually had like worked with a few on both sides, but she was of the opinion that they did not, which broke my heart kind of, because like, how could they not? How could they not butt heads?
That's like, oh, their stupid skulls are like this thick. Their cranial bolt is nuts. So what does she think it's for?
I don't know. I honestly I didn't want to open up because I'm like, I just met you. I don't want to ask about the most contentious issue in your field and like litigate all of that right now when we're like outside in the field and I just met you. But like, I really would like to have the conversation with her later. But to answer for my favorite dinosaurs, the really like the easy answer for me to give is just a really basic answer is T-Rex, because everybody loves T-Rex. When I was a kid, it was my favorite. But I will say that my little bit niche, little bit hipstery kind of pick is a more recent one, a Megaraptoran, Macrothorax, which is a newer discovery, which is like raptors, but Megaraptorans. They're much bigger. And one of my favorite paleo artists literally just did like one of the greatest like illustrations of this species that I've ever been blessed to see. And I think I reposted it on my Twitter, but the guy's name is Gabriel NU. If anyone wants to look at it, again, that's Maip Macrothorax. Maip is MAIP. It's basically kind of like a T-Rex, but instead of the tiny little baby hands, it's got like real big boy hands and like real freaking serious claws. It's like they got rid of the dorkiest part of T-Rex and just improved upon the design and just made it that much cooler, more badass, and intimidating.
Love that. Love that for it.
I'll send you the picture later, Erika.
Yeah, I know. I knew I would see it. $9.99 from Scott Bishop. Erika, can evolution add new genetic information that didn't already exist previously in creatures' DNA? If so, how? If not, how do species gain new structures like a fish gaining limbs? This is a wonderful question. This is actually a phenomenal question. So the example that I like to give for this is that it's like evolution absolutely does add new information, right? Because you can get new information by adapting old information. You can take the word cat and slowly replace letters in the word cat, duplicating it, subtracting letters, point mutations, right? And you can end up with a completely new sentence. If you have the word cat and you get a duplication of it, now you have cat, cat. If you have another duplication, you have cat, cat, cat. Couple of point mutations, you end up with the cat sat, right? And the cat sat conveys a whole lot more information than just the word cat. The same is true when you're looking at the genome, right? Like point mutations, duplications, large-scale deletions, frame shifts, all of this can drastically impact portions of the cascade in development and in expression. And what that's going to do is get you completely new body plans. So you do that example that I just gave you with Hox genes, and that's how you go from having a little nub to having a longer nub, to having a nub with wrist bones, to having a nub with wrist bones and metacarpals and phalanges, and so on and so forth. And the cool thing is, not only can we do this experimentally in the lab, right, by re-giving chickens their individual fingers, by duplicating the distal portions of this expression cascade, right, or doing the same with the sharks and skates, but you can actually see this happen in the fossil record. You can see the tetrapod body plan emerge, going from these sarcopterygian fish with not much more than just their little fins to seeing the emergence of things like the humerus, and then the humerus, the radius, and the ulna, and then the humerus, the radius, the ulna, and the carpals, and then the addition of the metacarpals and the phalanges. And all of this is happening in tandem with the development of the pectoral girdle, so the muscles that are necessary to allow organisms to push up and anchor their limbs, right? All of this happens in wonderful 4K in the fossil record as it has borne out in theory first, then in genetics, and then when we turn to geology and to paleontology. So that's what I would propose. Like, yes, you absolutely can get new information by altering existing information. So if you start out with a random string of code, you can get something fully functional, and then you can adapt that fully functional code into a myriad of different ways. And then once you have selection, that shit proliferates through the population.
So I also love this question because this is, I mean, Erika knows that we get this all the time from creationists. I was literally just, I did a debunking video the other day of Stephen Meyer at the Discovery Institute, and he uses this argument all the time. So I was literally just got done with debunking this exact argument. So just to really quickly answer your question, Scott, how evolution can add new genetic information that didn't already exist previously in a creature's DNA, the answer is mutations. That is what every mutation is going to be adding different information. Now, all of a sudden I hear all the creationists, functional information and all this stuff. And you can't mutate to get a new functional structure. I already hear all the creationists shouting that. Well, this is why I have a favorite study in this regard. And this study is called Witnessing the Structural Evolution of an RNA Enzyme. And so, yes, this is biochemistry. Okay, I like biochemistry, deal with it. But this is specifically for an enzyme, so not for a whole creature. But this is the argument that Stephen Myers puts forward. And this is the main argument that they have at the Discovery Institute. And they cite this guy, Axe, I think was his name. And he did a study where he calculated. Yes, Douglas Axe. And he did this study where he calculated, the odds of just randomly mutating to get a new functional tertiary structure of an enzyme. And he calculated it to be 10 to the 77th power or something ludicrous. That could never happen. Impossible. So I'm this is why I love this study, because this study did exactly what Axe said. It was impossible. They literally took an enzyme and then they just introduced a whole lot of random mutations into it. And then one of these mutants had an entirely new tertiary structure that changed the entire active site of the enzyme. A literally just new structure on this enzyme that did not exist before that made it more functional. It literally increased its ability to do its job. And this totally new structure just came out of a random mutation. And it increased the functionality, increased its efficiency, was added new structural information that was functional and just came from a random mutation that happened in the lab. It didn't take a million years. It wasn't 10 to the 77th power unlikely. It literally happened in the time frame of a single experiment.
Now imagine that instead of that, you have billions of years and trillions upon trillions of trials. And what are you going to get? A shit ton of diversity, baby. $5 from Erikapedia. Ooh, if humans came out of Africa, then why is there still Africa? Checkmate, evolutionists. I need to whip this one out more often. This is truly a wonderful argument.
I love the one where it's if America, okay, look, I'm a European descendant. So why are there still Europeans? Why does Europe still exist if I'm American now? That Europeans should no longer exist. If I came from my parents, Erika, then why do I still have parents?
Just evolutionist propaganda up and down. I've never seen your parents, so
That's true. Actually, my parents are a conspiracy. They actually don't exist. Yeah. I was just covering it up to just pass my evolutionary agenda.
Yeah, of course, to push it, it down the
Erika, I and the public. This is the first time I've admitted this, but I am actually beyond just an immaculate conception. I have no parents of any kind, not just one.
So what you're telling me is that you were the result of abiogenesis, life from non-life?
Yes, exactly what I'm telling you, Erika. You heard it here first, folks. A prime example of abiogenesis. So.
That's crazy. No, we can't. We can't have this. $10 from Nikki D. Great host combo. Glad I could catch it at the end of the workday. Thank you very much, Nikki D. Appreciate it. There's always these lulls when we're waiting on the super chats. $5 from SJL, paraphrasing Mark 1025. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a creationist to solve the heat problem. Do you know? I have a wonderful anecdote here. I was walking yesterday, and actually, if these wonderful people are listening, because they said they watched The Line, they watched SkepTalk, I actually met some people who watch my YouTube channel and who know about my appearances here, and they were like, "Oh, we're huge fans." And the mother of this young family was like, do you know that I've actually used the heat problem in real life talking to creationists? And I was like, well, I can just die. Like, I can die happy now. My only goal here on Earth is to popularize the heat problem for busting young Earth creationism. And so I can finally just wither and rot because people are using it.
No, you can't, Erika. You have to stick around and host SkepTalk. We cannot lose you.
That's so true. That's so true, and I have many more. I have many more arguments against creationism that I want to popularize. So I can't. I simply must stick around. $5 from William Matz. Do people of different fields argue over which science field is better, like in the Big Bang Theory? Yes. I can say confidently yes, but it is in jest. So it's like when we're out in the field, at least when I was out in the field recently, the herpetology people and the mammalogy people butt heads all the time. It's like, I just found another stupid primate tooth, who cares? And then it's like, well, I just found a stupid rare snake vertebra, who cares, you know? But obviously we keep them. But it's like, you argue about which of your guys is cooler.
I know there's a big rivalry between like mammal paleontologists and dinosaur paleontologists. So even within the field, you're going to have people arguing about which subfield is superior. And by the way, you said that scientists oftentimes mean it in jest. Some scientists mean it in jest, and a lot of specifically physicists don't seem to.
Yeah. Well, there are always some crazies, like in every field of science and in every little subfield. There's a reason I like the Miocene so much, and it's because I'm scared of the hominin people. And I'm also scared of the dinosaur people. So it's like the Miocene is such a lovely little spot for me because it has apes and it also has big, cool animals. And I'm far away from the two meaner ends of the paleontology spectrum. With physics, I can only imagine. $5 Australian dollars from Ruben Manzo. Since octopus is from Greek meaning 8 limbs, the plural is actually octopodes, not octopi. Now hold on, Ruben, because at one point I said octopi, octopodes, octopuses, whichever it is. So I am allowing for my ignorance there, but that is good to know.
I have always heard that it's either octopoda or octopuses, and that the only one that's incorrect is octopi. That's what I've heard anyway.
Ruben, who's right? $4.99 from a reviewer. Random question for Erika. Are gorillas the only great ape that does the chest pounding? And do we know how or why that behavior evolved? Thanks. I think they're the only ones that do it commonly. So like chimps will sometimes, like hit their chest a little bit, but gorillas are the ones that stand up and do and it makes like this really weird hollow sound. And I think the reason they do it is specifically because the larger you are, the larger your chest pound sounds. And so by pounding on their chest like that, they're basically letting all the females and all the other males know on the basis of that sound that they are very large and they will protect their group of females, right? Or their territory. It's very similar to like orangs will make these long calls like orangutans will, and they've got like this big throat sac that is thought to help potentially amplify that. Siamangs too, howlers as well.
I've seen
$5 from Destabilize. Yeah, true. Humans do it as well. And you can see them when they're sizing each other up. £5 from Destabilize. Do you think animals mourning or showing sympathy is a sign of consciousness? Main reason why is I am vegan and I wanted to know your opinions. Love your channels. I do. Yeah, I think it's actually a above and beyond. I think that's like a theory of mind thing. I think it usually goes in tandem with theory of mind.
We agree. Yay.
We agree, Grayson. Don't worry. I don't have to start a fight. $10 from Melissa R. $10 from Melissa R. I'm new to the line. First time watching SkepTalk. Did I see Erika at a skeptic conference last week? If so, you have a new fan. You all are fantastic. I saved all tabs from your presentation. Thank you, Melissa. No, unfortunately, I was not at a skeptic conference last week. Did I have an impersonator? I hope so. I'm glad someone out there is representing glasses wearers.
Do you have a doppelganger in the skeptic community that's like attending conferences and giving presentations that like, this is news to me. You got to find her.
It's okay with me, honestly. I want to duplicate myself and spread the good news about how we can all be a gentle and modern ape. So the more of me that are saying that, the better.
it's better that your doppelganger is a skeptic, though. Like, what if you had a young Earth creationist doppelganger that was going to like the creation conferences and like, oh no,
her name's like Erika, Gutsuk Goblin.
Gutful Goblin.
Yeah, Gutful Goblin. $5 from Ericapedia. If life evolved in the universe, then why is there still universe? Checkmate, atheists. God, this just keeps getting better. We literally can't fight against this.
Okay, wait.
This
I
isn't
got it. Wait, I have the perfect atheist comeback to that. Are you ready? If life was created by God, why is there still a God?
I mean, I don't know how you could do better than that. I don't know.
Checkmate, theist.
I don't have the answer. I'm glad I'm not them. $5 Australian dollars from PhD Tony. So you guys are using my lack of free will to compel me to donate a super chat. This isn't even extortion. It's parasitism. Truly. We're sending our chemical signals to you and forcing you to do this, to do our bidding.
Yeah,
$5 from Monkey to Typewriter. Grayson, you never heard about Isaac Newton sitting under a tree and having a vulva fall on his head? Also, if Richard calls back, can we nickname him? Oh, this is good. This is how sex and physics. This is learning sex and physics.
Oh, well, okay. For those of you that do not know, Isaac Newton, I'm pretty sure never came into contact with any vulva of any form. Like, the dude died a virgin, and like, not like he was like middle aged. Like, he obviously was not like attempting. So maybe this is true, because for him to come into contact with one, it literally would just have to fall on his head. He's not going out of his way to to try to get romance.
He was too busy with his alchemy. Yeah, he was too busy finding the alchemical formula.
He was probably too busy deriving the male and female equations.
That's it. That's exactly why. His great unfinished work.
Once an object once an object has a gender, it will continue in that gender unless acted upon by another object.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah, we finally cracked gender fluidity.
Yeah.
10 Australian dollars from Ruben Monzo. Gender has nothing to do with people. It's a linguistic term used to categorize nouns, but the term was co-opted by John Money in the 1960s and applied to people in a vague and ambiguous way. I think, though, as we categorize it now, as we understand it now, what Grayson was saying with regard to the neurobiology has sort of kind of busts that, right? That it has nothing to do with people, but only as we consider it now, not in its original form as you're arguing here.
I would say that this is more of like an etymological fallacy, or like where you're basically saying that because this is where the word comes from, then that's what the word must mean now, which it does not follow. Words can have completely different etymological roots than the way that they're used today.
$5 from RC Deschenay. Please provide the link to the 2024 study. I have a few stubborn people's faces I want to staple it to. Grayson, you're on this.
Okay, so right now I've got the science.org content on it, and it has the link to the overall organization, but I can't find the link right now to an actual open source PDF of the study that I was looking at earlier. So I'm going to have to pull that up. I can post the actual link to the science article if that'll help people get this information.
Do that and then post the study when you find it in the comments.
Okay. Where should I put the link to just the science magazine article about this?
Put it in the chat, and if it won't let you, send it to me on Discord or Twitter, and I'll put it in the chat. £5 from Destabilize. I don't think sex or gender is that difficult. People are scared to admit sex isn't about anatomy. There are many other things to consider. Again, I think we're at this linguistic crossroads here. We have to define our terms. If we want to consider sex one thing and gender another thing, then they are different. If we want to consider them, lump them back into the whole, then I think you're basically saying that if you're lumping them together, sex isn't just about anatomy. If you want to parse them and say sex is anatomy, gender is expression, then you're kind of having a theory. You see what I'm saying? Like, it depends on how we define our terms.
Sorry,
$5 from Jeff
technologically
Cochran.
challenged, and I was just trying to find
No,
the.
Grayson, no
link
rush.
here.
Take your time. No rush.
I got
Take
it
your
though.
time.
I'm
$5 from Jeff
posting it
Cochran.
in the chat. There you go.
Good,
It
because
should
this is
be
a good question.
okay.
Hold on, I'm checking chat now. Oh, did you send it to me?
I put it in the private chat and I put it in the public chat. So people in the live chat now should be able to see that. But I since I'm not a mod, I can't post links that work. So
I'm gonna do it. Okay, so while I do that, Grayson,
Hang
you're
on.
gonna answer this
Grayson?
question first. $5 from. Oh, go
Hang
ahead.
on.
Sorry, Morgan.
Grayson, what's your chat name?
what's my chat name?
Yes.
Oh, Based Theory, the same name as my channel.
I don't see a post from you. Just post anything in chat and I'll make you a mod.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm also posting this in chat. Okay, here it is. Enjoy.
Nice.
Grayson, this is a good one for you. $5 from Jeff Cochran. Is there a small set of evidence for evolution that you found to be the most compelling for folks that don't accept evolution?
Oh, well, okay. Because I do have like a small set of evidence that I would consider to be the most compelling for folks who are sane and have critical thinking skills and like rational decision making. But that's a little bit different than the folks that don't accept evolution, right? Because some of the folks that don't accept evolution, there's literally no evidence that you could present to them that they would find to be compelling. But I have one specific study that I just think is like literally, I don't think that you can be a sane, rational person and look at this study and still reject evolution. I guess I can. Since the last time I posted a study went so well, this will be really easy to just post in the live chat, but we'll figure out a way. The way it's called statistical evidence for common ancestry. And what they basically did was just go for the statistics approach of like looking at actual people's like full genomes and then saying, well, look, we can look at functional, non-functional coding, non-coding. We can look at all these different various regions and we can compare how similar they are to each other. And then we can test this against a hypothesis of universal common ancestry or separate common ancestry, which is creationism. And literally the separate common ancestry is ruled out by, and here's where you get those actual huge numbers, like 10 to the 77 power or whatever. It's like literally ruled out by like a smaller chance than the number of atoms in the known universe by like a multiple factor. And what I like about this study so much is that they were looking at like the third wobble position in the codon. So like literally stuff where you could change the genetic code and it would have absolutely zero functional change on any of the protein outcomes. But they were looking at, well, how similar are those? Because those, if those are homologous, there's no functional reason why those should be homologous. They could be whatever they could have whatever identity, they would get the same protein at the end. So the homologous factors there that still show with a statistical mathematical certainty that there has to be universal common ancestry. I just don't think anybody that is mathematically sophisticated enough to actually understand the statistical argument in that study can possibly refute or not accept evolution after reading that study.
There's another one that actually does that specifically within primates, and it compares family level common ancestry, species level common ancestry, and overall common ancestry, right? So it's like
I think it's the same one.
Well, no, because this one's on primates specifically.
No, this one's on primates
there's two
too.
of them. Oh, okay, then it's the same one. Yeah,
the one I'm making is for primates.
Okay, we're talking about the same one, but it combines like biogeography, the fossil record, right, morphology, and the aspects of the genome, right, all together. And I think the specific number it gives is it's like the odds of explaining this pattern outside of universal common descent is like less likely than picking an atom out of the universe twice in a row, or like 3 times in a row, the same atom out of all the atoms in the entire universe. Like it's just but all of that being said, if it's me, right, I'm up against a creationist, you know, I'm talking to Wendell. I'm talking to Wendell on Twitter, and I'm like, I want to explain to him why I think I can support evolution. I got my go-to picture, hominin evolution, every single time. And the reason hominin evolution is so impactful is because it's a two birds, one stone situation. Creationists like to say, well, we'll accept some level of evolution. Even Answers in Genesis puts Pachycetus on the Ark, on their stupid Ark replica, where they're like, oh, maybe we'll allow for all of cetacean evolution from Pachycetus. But people are very prickly about human evolution because it cements us so firmly in the natural world and as a part of the rest of the animal kingdom. So human evolution is very powerful for, saying, okay, well, you either accept all of evolution and common descent, right? Or you accept none of it. That's why it's so useful as a tool. So I like to show the hominin evolution timeline that I created that has our wonderful skulls, our crania of hominids from Sahelanthropus all the way up to anatomically modern Homo sapiens. And I contrast that with this was all predicted ahead of time. Before any of this, Darwin and his peers were like, yep, human evolution probably happened from an earlier, more basal ape, probably happened in Africa. This is what that critter would have looked like. Arthur Keith was the first guy who was like, it might have even been gibbon-like, right? We've got all of this stuff laid out in wonderful detail. That's my go-to. $9.99 from Kaushik Roy. Too socially anxious to call. My question is, why is it reasonable to live in accordance with perceived truth? How do we know evolution optimized for truth perception, leading to beneficial outcomes? Like a solid question, kind of. Do what?
How I'm reading this is basically through we have evolved to have certain sensory perceptions of the world. How do we know that that's actually tracing on to the objective, true world out there at all? And I think that one, you can't know, but you can be pretty reasonably assured based on the reliability. Obviously, there is no actual answer to solipsism. It's just you can't defeat solipsism. It's an unfalsifiable position. But if we were evolved in the world where there's a predator out there and we didn't perceive it, we get eaten. Okay, we are evolved to function in the world around us, and in order to function, you kind of have to be able to perceive what's actually out there. If you are not able of perceiving the predator when it's really there, you're going to get eaten. The people that can perceive the predator are that can perceive the truth that there's a predator out there trying to eat you are obviously going to be favored. So there's a certain amount that is just functionally, you need a certain amount of true perception in order to not get killed. But you can't know 100% of the true things because we're only ever going to perceive what is relevant for our survival.
Yeah, I think it works a lot like science in that way, right? It's like if a hypothesis can make correct predictions over and over and over again, then it generally becomes accepted. And in the same way, if your senses through generations over and over and over again tell you enough about the world to survive, then those senses are honed to maximize the amount of information that is, insofar as we can tell, correct. $5 from Ericapedia. Onions are stupid needs to be a t-shirt. Well, they are. They make me cry when I cut them.
I kind of want a t-shirt that says onions are 4 times more complicated than I am.
Yeah.
Because it's 14 billion base pairs or something for an onion, and then it's 4 billion for a human. So
well, I looked it up at the gene level, and it's 450,000 genes are in an onion, and it's humans have 20 to 25,000 genes. Those are genes. That's not base pairs. That's genes. Shit that's actually doing stuff. So an onion leads a rich life. $5 from Jeff Cochran. How do changes in the number of chromosomes occur? It seems to have happened a lot in the history of evolution. No space for all my question on this. Wow, what a wonderful question. One that I am, believe it or not, pretty well versed on because I have the human chromosome 2 fusion all the time. So a lot of the times what happens when you've got an addition or a subtraction of a chromosome, in the case of the fusion, so the subtraction of a chromosome in the overall number for an organism and its karyotype, right, is typically because you get 2 chromosomes that fuse together. And the reason that happens is because the telomeres degrade enough to expose subtelomeric regions that kind of make them susceptible to fusion. Now, a lot of the times this is lethal, but sometimes it's not. Yeah, they're sticky. If you take away the caps, then they're sticky and they'll stick together. And sometimes humans are actually born with like Robertsonian translocation. So they're born with the different number of chromosomes than is typical for humans. And they can reproduce. They have no clear pathology, and they can reproduce perfectly happily and have a child with somebody without a Robertsonian translocation or with one, right? So yeah, this happens all the time in evolution. We've documented fusions in equids and in suids. And if we look at, goodness gracious, the gibbons, right? Gibbons are ridiculously interfertile with one another in the family Hylobatidae, and they have all sorts of numbers of chromosomes. I think they differ by like 20 chromosomes in the two most distant. Some thereabouts. It's thereabouts. So it's like, it's not that difficult. It's opportunity in the right chromosomes. And again, we're looking at a whole lot of trials.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you said that all perfectly. I've also done a lot of chromosome 2 fusion debates. I think I did one with Donnie from Standing for Truth, specifically on chromosome 2 fusion and going through it all, like in all the gritty details. And the evidence is so overwhelmingly strong that our human chromosome 2 is the fusion of two like more basal like primate chromosomes. Like it's literally just so overwhelmingly certain that is the case based on what we actually can read in our own chromosomes. It's literally written in our own DNA that this happened. And the amount of mental gymnastics that creationists will go to try to make that different and to try to figure out how that could not be the case with the evidence we have is mind-boggling. I mean, this is one of the strongest cases.
It's so dumb too, because they can just say the fusion happened in like their version of the creation story. Like just say that it happened because of genetic entropy. It doesn't matter, right? Like the reason they don't want to say it is because if they accept that a fusion happened, at some point humans had the same number of chromosomes as all other apes. And that's too close for comfort for them. It's the same reason they try to argue with the percent similarity. It's the same reason they argue with ERVs. They don't want to be apes. And that's so sad because being an ape is awesome. 1999 from Ian Colson. Skipped out on ordering dinner to send y'all some dollar dues. Love SkepTalk. Teaches me so much and I'm always excited to learn. Thank you so much for skipping out on dinner for us. I hope we at least provided you with some good entertainment.
I would also say try to make healthy decisions for your body. I mean, if it was a healthy meal to skip, maybe, but, look after your cells. They're pretty important for you. Give them the nice nutrition that they deserve. But we appreciate your donations, too. So thank you for donations.
Yeah, I'm going to pretend in my head that it was actually just an expensive DoorDash at McDonald's and be like, oh, okay, well, it was actually a healthy decision to donate to SkepTalk instead of stay home and stay home and have a nice healthy salad and some salmon and some bread and $5 for Monkey to Typewriter. Where did you get those Neanderthal genes? The fossil record gap, but people keep telling me they look like my mom. Something's wrong with me. Yes, something is, Monkey to Typewriter. Something is very wrong with you. Get these awful jokes out of here. $5 from Richmond Dies. That's why the mind cannot be downloaded. It's a totally crazy web, it's totally a web of crazy interconnections. It will never happen. Well, and how do you know that you don't have the prestige problem? You know what I mean? Those who know.
I would say never say never. But I don't know how you could possibly download something to your mind because it would have to literally be rewriting your connections and neurochemistry, and the amount of change to your anatomy that would have to occur for you to be able to download something into your head would be pretty wild. But I would say never because maybe one day we could have nanotechnology capable of making that level of adjustments on that kind of fine-grained molecular detail. Who knows? Never say never.
Grayson, it's the teleportation problem. If you get teleported, how do you know that the reassembled you is you? It's a ship of Theseus. Is it you? Is it actually, right? Like Soma, it's freaky.
It's not a problem as long as the other version of me is instantaneously evaporated.
Okay, all right. If you say so. $10 from Larry Fishman. Mark Kelly was outed as being on Exxon's payroll and had been watering down and blocking environmental legislation. So he's at the bottom of the list of people who I want to run with Harris. That is really good to know. I didn't know that. So now he's at the bottom of my list too.
He's
or close. You can't stop blocking environmental legislation.
Largely, from what I understand of his politics, is that he's kind of more on the more right wing, the more conservative part of the Democratic coalition. So he's very like pro police. He's a little bit anti union, and then this information about with the environment is just it's painting a full picture, I think.
Sounds like his wife is cooler. He did go to space, though. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I do have to admit that. $20 from Wereworm. I want to posit that by Grayson's definition, evolution is a process that has emergent intelligence, in the sense that evolution is intelligent design, albeit not through a conscious agent, as creationists propose. That's an interesting part.
I don't think that it would fit, because I get what they're saying in terms of the core functions of intelligence, of relevance realization, and then like the ability to be able to make predictions. I would say that maybe you could argue that natural selection is some sort of relevance realization, but I would still think it's a little bit of a stretch. But I certainly don't think that natural selection is doing any predictive anything. So I don't think it really fits, in my opinion.
It's a fun thought experiment, though. In emergent intelligence.
I do think that maybe we do have some level of disagreement about what is intelligent versus not intelligent, because you were saying stuff like you don't think that insects are doing any like intelligent functions, or there's no sort of intelligence that is displayed by single-cell organisms or stuff like that. So I think that maybe we do have a slight difference in the idea of what is intelligent.
It's not that I don't think that they have any intelligence. It's that I think that they are less intelligent and that their consciousness is in lockstep with their level of intelligence, right? Okay. Because like if intelligence is just response stimulus, why wouldn't natural selection be an emergent intelligence? That's why I like my definition instead of yours, Grayson. $5 Canadian from Yahooligan. This is extra Grayson tax for such a great show. Erika, always a pleasure. They love seeing you here, Grayson. I love having you here.
I do have a specific Grayson tax with Yahooligan, though, to wherever I make an appearance, I see. He is contractually obligated to donate at least $2 Canadian.
I see. Well, that's good to have. $5 Australian from Ruben Monzo. Given the Bible has remained intact for thousands of years, the BBC truly has no excuse for those missing Doctor Who episodes. Yeah, the Lost Media folks really need to get on that, don't they? I feel like they're always out and about, like finding, the secret Smash Bros. Promotional material from 1998, but then I don't know when Smash Bros. Originally came out.
Now, I would argue that those missing episodes of Doctor Who are the equivalent of the apocryphal books of the Bible, like the Gospel of Thomas and all the weird stuff where Jesus talks as a sidekick, all the weird like non-canon stuff. Those are the missing Doctor Who episodes of the Bible.
Oh wow. $10 Canadian from Terry DeWispalier. If you two could play a game of Theropod, Sauropod, or Nithician real quick, I'd love you both forever. And probably subscribe to something too. Rock, paper, scissors, in case that was unclear. Okay, so Theropod is the rock, Sauropod is the paper, and Ornithischian is the scissors. Okay, ready?
Okay.
On shoot.
Okay.
Theropod, Sauropod, Ornithischian, shoot. Crushed.
Yep. Nice.
It's okay. It's okay, Grayson. I just beat you because I went with Theropod.
Theropod was probably a smart. I mean, honestly, I should have gone with Sauropod. Nothing's going to beat Sauropod in real life.
That is true. Nothing is going to beat Sauropod in real life. That is a really good point. $50 from, holy mackerel, $50 from Red Shrek. Demis Gutzik, how are you feeling about Homo naledi? Are they a legit extinct human species or just a fantasy of Lee Berger? This is the problem. This is the problem with the way that they handled the Rising Star situation and the most recent stuff with the quote-unquote burials, the quote-unquote art, and the quote-unquote third paper that also discussed the potential for fire usage, is that when you have such a garbage methodology that gets absolutely roasted by the entire scientific community, people look at what you've said and it brings absolutely everything you previously said into question. So, Red Shrek, Homo naledi is absolutely a legitimate hominin. It is a weird hominin at that. It's got this teeny tiny little brain case size, 600 cc's. It's relatively non-prognathic. It's got the developmental pattern in its teeth that looks more like Homo. From the waist down, this thing is a dead ringer for a committed terrestrial biped, and yet at the same time, its brain is super small, and it has an Australopith-looking shoulder and upper arm, but human-like hands. Like, this thing is a bizarre mix. It would have been very, like, early genus Homo-ish, except for the fact that the dates place it at, like, 236 to 335,000 years ago. It's weird. In my opinion, it's a late surviving vestige of early genus Homo, and it's in South Africa, so that checks out with the rest of the hominins sort of taking that green highway south and then still persisting well past their parent population in East Africa going extinct. But because the Rising Star cave system team made the argument that this thing buried its dead, which they certainly did not make the case for, used fire, which they certainly did not make the case for, made art, which they certainly did not make the case for, and then the last paper was on cognition. Everything else that they've said is now all of a sudden like up for grabs. Like, you're totally right. It's reasonable to ask these kinds of questions because the previous stuff was fumbled so badly. But I'll tell you, Homo naledi is legit. It is a very weird hominin because it's the only thing in those caves. And the reason this is all fresh on my mind is because literally this morning I recorded a video on the most recent paper on all of this stuff. I actually still have it pulled up here. It's open access. It's by Folk et al. No sedimentological evidence for deliberate burial by Homo naledi, a case study for highlighting the need for best practices in geochemical studies within archaeology and paleoanthropology. And they just absolutely roast the Rising Star team. The methodological errors in that set of preprints from 2023 is so much worse than even I had any idea. Like, the situation is really bad. And indeed, I don't blame you for asking that question, but it sucks that you have to ask it, because if the methodology had just been like actually followed in the beginning and proper experts had actually been consulted, they had like a good team of geologists and burial experts and things like that in Rising Star, we wouldn't be in this mess. But instead, the preprints were released despite the peer review, and they were released alongside a Netflix documentary, and that just rubs me and a lot of other people the wrong way.
And for
some
the
of it's a fantasy of Lee Berger.
For the people listening, you do have multiple videos on your channel about Homo naledi where they can learn more about your thoughts, right? In more depth, in more detail.
Yeah, yes, there is quite a bit, and the next video on my channel is going to be another video on Homo naledi, actually, because I've accidentally dubbed myself like a watchdog on this subject, and so I have to read the papers. I had to learn so much about chemostratigraphy today. And in general, like how we actually use X-ray fluorescence to tell whether or not a sample of sediment is clearly different from another. And the reason is because Berger and colleagues said that the sediment that was in the proposed burial was distinct enough from the surrounding sediment to mark it as a burial. But it's not. And the case isn't made with their own data, let alone if they had actually done the methodology proposed by the people they cite. It's a bad situation. $5 from Sapphic Bibliophile. Yay, science. Question: do either of you know about the antifreeze blood and the cold water fish mutation was a single mutation, or if there was more to it? I believe the de novo protein was a duplication event followed by a point mutation, I think. Do you know this off the top of your head, Grayson?
Off the top of my head, I didn't know exactly what type of mutation it was, but I was looking at it just while we were pulling it up. I'm not sure if this is it exactly, but it is verifying what you're talking about with being a duplication event. And it looks like there might have been subsequent duplications as well.
So, hold on just a second here. Hold on just a second. I accidentally added it as a bookmark instead of control Fing. Okay. Duplication. It looks like, according to this, it was a duplication of trypsinogen-like protease, or TLP. The neofunctionalization of a duplicate. So neo-functionalization, I think, requires an additional point mutation. So duplication plus point mutation reaches neo-functionalization. Bada bing, bada boom, you got yourself an antifreeze protein in a cold water fish. $5 from Larry Fishman. I'm an American and I don't care about root language grammar, so I will be Team Octopi until the day I die. They're coming after you on this one, Grayson.
Well, listen, okay? I'm an American too, and I believe that in America, we can all say stupid things that are wrong.
Wonderful. It's our God-given right. $5 from Sapphic Bibliophile. Erika, Erika, have you read Next of Kin, My Conversations with Chimpanzees by Roger Fouts about teaching chimps sign language, if you have thoughts? I have not read that, but I have read about sign language in apes and the non-human apes and that entire movement in the 70s, 80s, and I think it ended in the 80s, maybe early 90s, with Coco and Washoe and Nim Chimpsky and a lot of these guys. And I think the problem with sign language is that it's not as intuitive for the way that they typically communicate with gestures, which is why Kanzi, who is the bonobo that was taught to communicate using a lexigram, is actually like much more objective than the sign language. There's no room for interpretation. And it seems to suggest that chimpanzees are capable of like a rudimentary version of language. They have trouble with organizing things, right? So like you could tell Kanzi in English, you know, he's got his little toy refrigerator and a bunch of different toys that they give chimpanzees and bonobos in this ape sanctuary. And you could say to him like, okay, put the pine needles in the refrigerator, and he'll walk over and get the pine needles and put them in the refrigerator. If you say to Kanzi, put the pine needles, then the blueberries in the refrigerator, he can't get that right. He's not capable of ordering the operations. And I'm not sure if it's because the sentence is too long. I think what they've come to the conclusion of right now is that that's not the case. It's just that there's not a order of operations that plays out in his brain. So they're pretty dang intelligent. Sign language just isn't the best way to tell how capable of language they are. There was a really cool paper that came out last week, end of last week, on chimpanzee gestural communications, which, by the way, chimpanzee gestures map to human toddler innate gestures at about 89-90%, which is really cool. So it seems to suggest we have a common ancestor for these very basic innate gestures, like give me. I hold out my hand and I say, that means give it to me. Anyways, there was a really cool paper that came out on gestural communications in chimps that said that they take turns. When they communicate with gestures, they're not just like, it's not like dogs barking at each other where they bark, 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 you know, kind of overlapping. Chimpanzees communicate with gestures in I gesture at Grayson, I pause and wait for him to gesture back at me, which is a really imperative, basic rule for conversation, which is cool. $5 from Monkey to Typewriter. This is just me bragging, but my son, a few months from 4 today, asked me, why do monkeys look like people? And I told him we're monkeys. His brain broke. Tell him he's a good, gentle, and very modern ape, in addition to being an anthropoid and catarrhine monkey. And that he's very smart. Very clever ape. $5 from Ericapedia. If we come from God, why is there still God? God damn it, why didn't I think of that? This was right there. Take my money. Grayson, you just earned $5 additional. Beast.
Wow. I'm good. What can I say?
Yeah, schmoozin'. $5 from Dylan Fuller. Isaac Newton did not die a virgin, especially with his male friend / assistant he paid to live with him. Think he'd prefer not a vulva to fall on him, LOL. They were roommates. They were just roommates.
Guys, they were just platonic, lifelong roommates. Get over it, guys.
They were friends.
Stop your woke agenda into our science history, okay?
The woke agenda. Next, they're gonna come for like Da Vinci. Notoriously straight Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah.
$5 Australian from Ruben Monzo. Once upon a time, a band of Vikings invaded Greece. They were the 4 Norsemen of the Acropolis. I'm sorry, like, are people just thinking that they can just like do this to me, right? Like,
we know that this is a hostage audience, and we have to read these out. That's what it is.
Yeah, this is so rude. I hate reading bad jokes, and this is awful. This is awful, Ruben. This is horrible. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, I thought they were going to squeeze some more in there.
A nice dad joke.
No, We did. We ended on a low note, but that's okay. That's okay, Ruben. I forgive you. I'm a very forgiving ape. So, guys, thank you so much for being here with us on SkepTalk. Let me just take a minute and tell you what is coming up, because it's my job as the host here, as the primary host, to tell you what's happening. So today is, of course, Monday. Tomorrow is Tuesday. We have Chewed Gum. It's me and Arden. If you guys will recall, I've been in Kenya for a month, so I'm sort of like doubling up on my shows this week. So it's going to be me and Arden hosting Chewed Gum. Come and ask us as many questions as you want. I'm excited for it. Then on Wednesday, we have the Hang Up with Matt Dillahunty and J. Mike. On Thursday, we have the Transatlantic Call-In Show with Josie and with Nominal. So that's Josie Caballero and Nominal Naomi. And then, of course, we have our two wonderful shows on Sunday, which have yet to get hosts sort of attached to them, but that will be happening. So make sure you're here for it. And with that, I mean, I think that's all I've got. Grayson, do you have anything you want to add?
No, this was a lot of fun. I mean, we definitely had like a different kind of batch of questions than we did last time, but it's still like we had a lot of, just like last time, we had a lot of really interesting like discussion from those questions. So thank you for everyone that actually asked a question and listened to that, because I think that we all hopefully like learned something out of this and got something out of this discussion. So thank you for having me on once again. I always love being on SkepTalk.
It's always my pleasure. And of course, as your gentle and of course very modern host, I will always return to SkepTalk because I love this place. I love the colors. I love the audience. I love getting to share the platform with so many different wonderful people like you, Grayson. And with that, I think that's it. Bye-bye. And then you the thing up there.